Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors meeting of July 9th, 2015. We're joined today by Mayor Ed Lee. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam President. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos present. President Breed.
Here.
Breed present. Supervisor Campos. Campos present. Supervisor Christensen. Christensen not present. Supervisor Cohen. Cohen present. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell present. Supervisor Kim. Kim present. Supervisor Marr. Marr not present. Supervisor Tang. Tang present. Supervisor Wiener. Wiener present. Supervisor Yee. Yee not present. Supervisor Christensen. Christensen present. Madam President, you have a quorum.
Madam Clerk, Supervisor Yee is present.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Madam Clerk, are there any communications?
I have none today, Madam President.
Colleagues, are any changes to the meeting minutes of April 28th or the April 29th special meeting? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve those minutes? Motioned by Supervisor Campos, seconded by Supervisor Cohen. Without objection, those minutes will be approved once public comment has been completed. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are none today, Madam President.
Can you please call the first item?
The first item of business is the policy discussion between the Honorable Mayor Edwin Lee and eligible members of the Board of Supervisors. The President will recognize the Mayor, who may provide initial remarks for up to 5 minutes. The President will then recognize the eligible member, Supervisor Christensen. Members may ask follow-up questions as long as the entire discussion per supervisor does not exceed 5 minutes.
Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Mayor. Do you have any opening remarks today?
Just briefly, thank you, President Breed, and thank you, members of the board, and of course the public, for being here. Just last week, I was here at the board chambers presenting our proposed balanced budget. It's a responsible budget that not only safeguards and enhances vital city services, but it's one that's affordable over the long term and one that makes smart investments. As you well know, city government has an important role to play in making the lives of all people better, and these good economic times represent a significant opportunity for us to continue to make sure that San Francisco is safe, it's a livable city, and a city that confronts our affordability challenge. And if we're going to talk about affordability, we must talk about housing. And every day I work on this issue, and every day I challenge my staff to do more and to work with the community to confront this challenge with real solutions. We know we need more resources to build housing now, and that's why we're proposing a 2015 affordable housing bond to speed up construction of housing for low and middle income families without raising property taxes. We worked hard to increase this bond, and that's why I'm asking you, members of the board, to amend the proposed 2015 affordable housing bond to add $50 million that had been identified by our controller to be dedicated to the planning, the acquisition, and the construction of affordable housing in the Mission neighborhood. We know the Mission neighborhood needs more housing, needs more affordable housing, and we need to stabilize the neighborhood. This increase in the bonding capacity brings the proposed housing bond to $300 million, again without raising property taxes. This 2015 affordable housing bond is a crucial component to my more than $1.1 billion 5-year affordable housing response plan that will build, rehabilitate, and preserve 30,000 homes by 2020, with more than 10,700 affordable homes for low and middle income families throughout the city. This additional $50 million is crucial to my Mission 2020 strategy that includes site acquisition and sets a series of ambitious goals at building more housing and stabilizing the Mission neighborhood, where 2/3 of the residents are low and moderate income. We'll accomplish these goals together by implementing strategies that stop the displacement of longtime residents, increases the supply of affordable housing in the neighborhoods, and acquires buildings for affordable housing, creates greater job opportunities for residents, and strengthens the small business character of the mission. We must also continue to build housing affordable to people across income spectrums in order to generate the revenues to build even more affordable housing. Over the next 2 years, new market rate development is anticipated to generate more than $100 million in affordable housing fees that can be put to work to secure sites and build housing throughout the city. With the success of our city, we have a special opportunity to ensure the prosperity of our city extends to all of our residents. And we'll continue to invest in our diverse neighborhoods, in our infrastructure, and most importantly, in our people, so that San Francisco remains a city for everyone. And I view the submission of the proposed budget as the first step in that process, and I'm proud of what we've been able to accomplish so far, and I look forward to working with the board to deliver a budget that invests responsibly in the residents of our city. So with that, let's get to Supervisor Christensen's question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today we have one question from our District 3 colleague, Supervisor Julie Christensen. Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, you and I have talked a lot about affordable housing across the city. District 3, which is a little different from a lot of the other districts in the city because of a lack of open space. We've been discussing creative ways to both create but also to retain housing stock to keep our San Francisco residents in the district. There are few opportunity sites for new housing in the district. What can the mayor's office do to expand alternative housing opportunities throughout District 3, especially for our low and middle income residents and our seniors and families?
Thank you, Supervisor Christensen, and I appreciate your question, and I agree that we must be unwavering in our commitment to increase and preserve our stock of affordable and safe housing that serves a range of income levels and protects the vibrant and unique character of our San Francisco neighborhoods. Well, that's a lot to balance, and it's clear we need to maintain our focus in order to address these issues. Building and preserving affordable housing is a key focus of my administration. We can expand housing opportunities for working families, low-income households, and seniors on fixed incomes with strategically deployed funding and programs. Programs like yours and Supervisor Wiener's accessory dwelling unit legislation. But this isn't just about developing more housing and doing so faster. It's also about the people who live in our city, young and old, people of all ethnicities who feel vulnerable to market pressures and who can't afford the high rents. That's why I applaud your commitment to your district through your call, along with Supervisor Cohen and President Breed, to establish a neighborhood preference program, a program that will, for the first time in our city's history, prioritize neighborhood residents for our affordable housing programs. This policy will help stabilize our neighborhoods by keeping residents in their communities, an important step towards preserving the character of our diverse neighborhoods that helps to define and strengthen districts such as yours. We all agree that we must continue to do more, and that's why you now have a number of important housing policy decisions before you. Policies crafted by my housing working group and designed to increase the amount of affordable and middle-income housing across the city to address our housing affordability crisis. These policies include changes to our off-site inclusionary that will help speed up the development of neighborhood-based affordable housing and make inclusionary housing more accessible to moderate income residents. They outline an affordable housing bonus program that will provide more housing in middle income units without a city subsidy in transit-rich corridors of our city. They'll give small builders the ability to buy existing rental housing with tenants at risk of being displaced and set those buildings aside as permanent affordable housing. And finally, pending before the board this week is our 2015 Affordable Housing Bond, a bond that will not raise taxes and won't stall the city's capital commitments to protect and enhance open space and emergency services for our citizens. As I stated earlier, our housing bond will provide funding to create new affordable housing units, speed and complete the rebuilding of public housing, protect existing residents in rent-controlled units, and expand rental and homeownership opportunities for our city's workforce, including first responders, educators, nonprofit workers, service employees, and nurses. We are committed to investing $2.7 billion to address the city's ongoing affordability crisis over the next 20 years. And together we can increase access to safe and affordable housing and, in turn, promote diversity, social equity, economic vitality, which are the cornerstones that support our thriving city. So with that, I know we have a lot to do, so let's all get back to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being here today. Madam Clerk, can you please read the consent agenda?
Items 2 through 11 comprise the consent calendar. These items are considered routine. If a member objects, an item may be removed and considered separately.
Can you please call the roll?
On items 2 through 11, Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Christensen.
Aye.
Christensen, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim.
Aye.
Kim, aye. There are 11 ayes.
These ordinances are finally passed unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 12 is an ordinance to amend the Administrative Code to revise Chapter 6, the Public Works Contracting Policies and Procedures.
Supervisor Wiener.
Madam President, I move to continue item 12 1 week.
Supervisor Wiener has made a motion to continue this item 1 week to the meeting of June
16th.
16, 2015. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Campos. Can we take this, colleagues, without objection? Without objection, this item is continued to next week. Next item, please.
Item 13 is an ordinance to waive the competitive process requirement of Administrative Code Section 2A.173 and to approve Amendment Number 1 to the domestic terminal food and beverage lease between Emporio Ruli and the city for a second lease space with an additional minimum annual guarantee of approximately $20,000 for a new total minimum annual guarantee of $140,000, term ending November 18th, 2018.
Colleagues, can we take this item? Same house, same call. Without objection, this ordinance is passed unanimously on the first reading. Next item, please.
Item 14, ordinance to retroactively waive the competitive process requirement of Administrative Code Section 2A.73 to award a second lease space under the Rental Car Center Cafe lease, a small business set aside between Marina's Cafe and the city with an additional minimum guarantee of approximately $10,000 for a new total annual guarantee of $21,000, term ending August 4th, 2018.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this ordinance is passed unanimously on the first reading. Next item.
Item 15 is an ordinance to amend the Health Code to authorize the Animal Control Officer to waive adoption fees and other applicable charges upon finding that such a waiver will maintain or increase the live release rates.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this ordinance is passed unanimously on the first reading. Item 16.
Item 16, resolution to authorize the Recreation and Park Department to accept and expend an approximate $744,000 grant from the state of California for the Noe Valley Town Square project, to authorize the Director of Real Estate to record a deed restriction with the assessor recorder against the property, providing that the use restrictions contained in the grant agreement will be covenants, conditions, and restrictions on the use of the property in perpetuity.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Item 17.
Item 17 is a resolution to approve an amendment to the agreement between the Department of Public Health and the Bayview Hunters Point Foundation for behavioral health services to increase the total contract amount to a not to exceed $29.25 million for the term ending December 31st, 2015.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Item 18.
Item 18, resolution to approve an agreement amendment between the Department of Public Health and the Public Health Foundation Enterprises to provide program management services to support the San Francisco Homeless Outreach Team and increase the total contract amount to $23.76 million, term ending June 30th, 2018.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Item 19.
Item 19, resolution to approve the Sixth Amendment to the contract agreement between Public Health and Fort Help for substance abuse treatment services for users with methadone and other replacement therapies to increase the total contract amount to a not to exceed $14.56 million for the term ending June 30th, 2018.
Same House, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Item number 20.
Item 20, resolution to approve a contract amendment to the agreement between Public Health and the San Francisco Study Center for programs providing services to adults and transitional aged youth to increase the total not to exceed contract amount to approximately $13.45 million for the term ending December 31st, 2015.
Same House, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you call items number 21 and 22 together, please?
Item 21 is a resolution to authorize the Director of Risk Management to enter into the First Amendment of a contract with Aon Risk Insurance Services West for insurance broker and risk management consulting services to increase the contract limit from $9.5 million to $15.75 million, term ending July 21st, 2016. Item 22 is a resolution to authorize Risk Management to enter into the First Amendment of a contract with Alliant Insurance Services for insurance broker and risk management consulting to increase the contract limit $19.52 million to $32.28 million for the term ending July 30th, 2017.
Same House, same call. Without objection, these resolutions are adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please call items 23 and 24 together?
Item 23, resolution to authorize the real property lease with KLW Investments. Item 24 is also authorizing a real property lease with KLW Investments. The first is for 3119 Mission Street, consisting of 11,000 square feet, for approximately $474,000 in base rent. The other is for 3120 Mission Street for base rent of an initial year for use by the Human Services Agency for a 5-year term from July 1st, 2015 through June 30th, 2020.
Colleagues, can we take these items, same House, same call? Without objection, these resolutions are adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you please call item number 25?
Item 25 is a resolution to fix prevailing wage rates for workers performing work under city contracts for public work and improvements for janitorial services in public off-street parking lots, garages, storage facilities for automobiles, for workers engaged in theatrical or technical services, for shows on city property, for the hauling of city-generated solid waste, and for moving services under city contracts at city-owned or leased facilities, for workers engaged in exhibit, display, or trade show work at special events on city property.
Same House, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Item 26.
Item 26 is a resolution to authorize the Director of Public Works to execute modification number 5 to a professional services agreement with Montgomery Corporation to provide Inspector of Record inspection services for San Francisco General Hospital rebuild program in an amount not to exceed $11.6 million for a term expiring December 31st, 2016.
Same House, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Item 27.
Item 27 is a resolution to approve Amendment Number 1 with the New Flyer of America, Inc. contract to change the propulsion system in 6 of the previously ordered 61 buses from parallel propulsion to series propulsion, and to purchase an additional 48 standard and 50 articulated low-floor diesel hybrid buses for a total contract amount not to exceed approximately $168 million.
Same House, same call. Oh, wait, the House has, same House, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Item 29, please.
Item 28, Madam President, is a resolution to approve and authorize the execution of a host site agreement with PGA Tournament Corporation for the use of TPC Harding Park Golf Course for the 2020 PGA Championship for a site fee of $2 million.
Colleagues, can we take this item? Same House, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 29 is a resolution to approve an extension agreement between the Public Utilities Commission and the Modesto Irrigation District, extending the term of the existing long-term energy sales agreement to the earlier of the approval of a replacement agreement by both parties of June 30th, 2016.
Same House, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item, please.
Item 30, resolution to approve an extension agreement between the Public Utilities Commission and the Turlock Irrigation District to extend the term of the existing long-term power sales agreement to June 30th, 2016.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Next item.
Item 31 is a resolution to declare the intent of the city to reimburse certain expenditures from proceeds of future bonded indebtedness, authorizing the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development to submit an application and related documents to the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee to permit the issuance of residential mortgage revenue bonds in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $33 million for 2500 Aurelius Walker Drive.
Same house, same call. Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you call items 32 through 34 together?
Item 32 is an ordinance to amend the Administrative Code to prohibit advertising of sugar-sweetened beverages on city property. Item 33 also amends the Administrative Code to bar city departments from using city funds to purchase sugar-sweetened beverages and to bar the sale of distribution of sugar-sweetened beverages under city contracts and grants. And item 34 is an ordinance to amend the Health Code to require advertisements for sugar-sweetened beverages to include a warning about the harmful effects of consuming such beverages and to impose penalties for noncompliance.
Thank you. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Colleagues, today before us are three pieces of legislation, and I'm proud to co-author these pieces of legislation with Supervisor Marr and Supervisor Cohen. The three of us have worked together, also Supervisor Avalos, for a long time now to confront a major public health problem for our city, for our state, for our country, and that is the significant negative health impacts on our community of sugary beverages. These drinks are almost half of all sugar in the American diet. One 12-ounce can of soda has 10 teaspoons of sugar. 32-ounce Big Gulp has 25 teaspoons of sugar, and we know that these drinks are fueling the explosion of type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and other serious health problems. We are trending towards 40% of Americans having type 2 diabetes, 50% in communities of color, and approximately 1/3 of teenagers today have either diabetes or pre-diabetes. This is a looming disaster for our healthcare system, and we have to take action. Last fall, 56% of the voters in San Francisco voted in favor of our proposed soda tax. 56%, a strong majority, despite $10 million in opposition spending by the soda industry. While we did not achieve the 2/3 required to enact the tax, the voters sent a very clear message that they agree that this is a problem and that they want us to take action. And today we are taking action. I will talk about the health warnings legislation and leave it to Supervisors Marr and Cohen to talk about the other pieces. This legislation, for the first time anywhere that we're aware of, will require health warnings connected to sugary drinks, specifically health warnings on advertisements for sugary drinks. It is modeled on the concept of health warnings for cigarettes, where 20% of the ad space will have to be the health warning. It will warn people that these drinks are a factor in giving people diabetes, leading to obesity and oral health problems. The legislation will apply to billboards, to signs connected to stores, and any other kind of sign in our city. We think that this is an important step, as with cigarettes and as with other products that make people sick, in terms of making sure people have all the information they need to be healthy. We know with cigarettes that over 50% of Americans smoked, and due to a combination of smart public policy interventions around cigarette taxes and health warnings and so forth, we were able to collapse smoking rates down to a little bit more than 15%. We know that health warnings work. They have worked with cigarettes, and they will work here, and I hope that this legislation will lead other cities and states and ultimately the federal government to move in the right direction in terms of warning consumers that these are not just harmless products that taste good, that these are products that are making people sick, and we need to take action. I want to thank all of the many advocates who have been working for so many years on this issue and who've helped us with this legislation. I want to especially thank my legislative aide, Jeff Cretin, for his incredible work on this issue. And I also just want to thank again Supervisor Marr and Supervisor Cohen for their work on this legislation as well. And colleagues, I ask for your support.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. Supervisor Cohen.
Good. Thank you very much. Supervisor Weiner, you've got my support. Absolutely. Here's something that you may not realize, that without action on this legislation today, one of 3 of today's children will develop diabetes in their lifetime, and among them, African American and Latino youth will be half of this particular population. And the 3 pieces of legislation that we're going to be discussing and hopefully voting on today is for in an effort of our continuing effort to address the health disparities and making our communities healthier, but also better and more informed. The piece of legislation that I've introduced and that we're going to be voting on today will prohibit advertising sugary sweetened beverages on city property. And what's interesting about this is that the legislation is modeled off of a prohibition that already exists. It applies specifically to tobacco and alcohol products inside San Francisco. So what we're proposing here today is not something that's so new and earth-shattering. I actually fundamentally believe that we are doing the right thing and that we should be adhering to the standards that we hold for alcohol and tobacco, particularly when we know that these sugary beverages are a product that we know that is identified by the science and research to be slowly killing us. Our youth are one of the main reasons why I'm involved in this effort. I fear that they are heavily targeted. Back in 2013, the beverage companies spent more to promote events and sponsorships, specifically targeting our youth, than any other food category. Now, this prohibition on sweetened beverages and advertising will help us begin to move closer to bridging the gap of the health disparities that exist. I, too, would like to acknowledge a few very talented people that have been working with us. I want to acknowledge Deputy City Attorney Anita Wood for her efforts on this legislation. I also would like to recognize Yo-Yo Chan on my staff, and every advocate, every person of the 56% of San Franciscans that voted on this measure. We are doing this for you. We have heard your charge, and we, Supervisor Weiner, myself, and Supervisor Marr, are picking up the mantle and charging ahead. To the advocates, to our research sponsors, to the research universities that are with us, the medical and dental associations, this has been an incredible effort, and we are very grateful for your leadership. Colleagues, I hope that you will be able to join Supervisor Weiner and Supervisor Marr and I in supporting this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Marr.
Yeah, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Supervisor Cohen and Weiner and Avalos as well, but to acknowledge that this didn't start with 4 politicians. It started with generations of activists that are now a part of the Choose Health SF coalition, which includes the San Francisco Health Improvement Partnership advocates, Shape Up SF, and many, many other groups. I wanted to also say that it's not only a looming public health crisis, it's a racial justice crisis as well. As others said, my daughter's generation, she's 15, 1/3 of them will develop type 2 diabetes in their lifetime, but it's a racial justice issue because 1/2 or more of the Latino or African American and Chicano populations will develop type 2 diabetes in their lifetime. That means they will live 8 to 9 years less than other folks that don't have type 2 diabetes. It's literally taking years off of their lives. I've said that this is round 2 of San Francisco versus Big Soda. We've learned from the battles against big tobacco, and it came up in our hearing to approve these 3 items, and Supervisor Kim was in the hearing as well. Big Soda used tactics like big tobacco did. They trotted out a dietitian that was paid for by the American Beverage Association to testify, don't worry about it. Who are you going to believe, a paid-for dietitian, or are you going to believe this broad, diverse coalition for public health in San Francisco that's been working for decades on this issue? I also wanted to say that besides addressing the predatory marketing of soda companies and the right-to-know health warnings that my colleagues have proposed, my piece of this trio of legislation would prevent city departments from purchasing any sugar-sweetened beverages, and also city contractors and grantees from selling or distributing sugar-sweetened beverages because they are so harmful to people's health. I wanted to also acknowledge that the Broad Coalition is committed to not only looking at these types of legislation, but also addressing other issues with hopefully next steps to pass a soda tax at some time in the future in San Francisco. The last point I'd like to make is that I think the time has come for San Francisco to join other cities, and this trio of legislation will help establish us to protect our young people and our public health, but also to establish that there's nothing more important than health in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd just like to add myself as a co-sponsor to all these three pieces of legislation, and briefly we'll just say that I am really glad to see that the practices of our city departments are going to be consistent with our public health goals. I think that we've seen instances where the city has not lived up to what our public health goals, but now we're stating them very, very clearly. Over the past few years in Civic Center Plaza, we've had the Mountain Dew tour come with giant 20-foot bottles advertising Mountain Dew in front of Civic Center. They've actually brought a whole acre of dirt that they've piled up in front of City Hall to be able to spread out over our plaza, and they attract people to come, and then they give samples of Mountain Dew to the guests who come. This is something that I have actually been very vocal against. Is this the best use of our public land? Is this how we want to use our parks? That even our park department has had an expression of wanting to limit access to sugar-sweetened beverages, but when it comes to a big corporation like Mountain Dew paying lots of money to the city to be able to use our public space, we turn a blind eye. Well, that will be no longer the case with this legislation passing, and I wholeheartedly support. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, President Bree. I just want to keep it short. Really thank the authors, the co-authors of these three pieces of legislation. I'm going to be very supportive of it. But I'm glad that the three of you have been consistent with your message and have pursued these different avenues to counter what we have to deal with in society. I know the damage it could do in terms of these drinks and how things are advertised. This, to me, the soda is the cigarette of the teenagers. Soda is to our kids that are as early as 0. As early as 1 year old, they're drinking it. And we need to do something about this and educate our community about the hazards of overdoing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Colleagues, can we take these items, same house, same call? Without objection, these ordinances pass unanimously on the first reading. Madam Clerk, can you call the next item?
Item 35 is an ordinance to order the summary vacation of a sewer easement and approving the sale for $16,000 within property located at 98 Crown Terrace and adopting the required findings.
Colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, this ordinance passes unanimously on the first reading. Item 36.
Item 36 is a resolution to declare the intention of the Board of Supervisors to establish a property-based business improvement district to be known as the Dog Patch and Northwest Potrero Hill Green Benefit District, to levy a multi-year assessment on identified parcels within the proposed and approved boundaries map, approving the management district plan, the engineer's report, the notice, the proceedings, the assessment ballot, and the required findings, and setting a time and place for the public hearing as July 28th at 3 p.m. here in this legislative chamber, room 250.
Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you very much. This is also an exciting piece of legislation. So what you have before you is a resolution of intent to form the city's first ever green benefit district in Dogpatch and Northwest Potrero Hill. And a few years ago, I began this conversation and working with groups of dedicated neighbors and property owners on creative solutions to fund open space improvements and maintenance to our growing eastern neighborhoods. And at the same time, I worked to pass legislation which would establish the process for creating a green benefits district, which would allow residential and commercial property owners to voluntarily assess themselves to pay for improvements and also to create public space that is so preciously needed. Now, this model is nearly identical to the city's process for forming community benefits, or many of you may know them as a CBD. But this is the first time both residential and commercial property owners are participating in an assessment district to utilize funds for a wider variety of services, such as graffiti removal, capital improvements to public right-of-ways, tree planting, as well as park maintenance. So it's a little bit of a nuance of a CBD, hence GBD. Now, you've heard me time and time again discuss the challenges that we are facing in the southeastern part of the city, and we need to be focused in prioritizing our new infrastructure improvements in the eastern neighborhoods. Now, this is one creative way and one creative strategy that where both the city and neighbors are taking up the challenge to create and maintain desperately needed public realms as well as needed park improvements. I've already heard from many neighborhood groups across the entire city who are looking to form something similar, and they are modeling their proposals after the work that we've done in the Dogpatch and Northwest Potrero Hill. I do want to take a moment to thank the members of the Community Steering Committee who have worked hard in advance of this process. Build Public for providing the technical assistance needed to advance to where we are today, and the guidance as well as the City Department, particularly calling out Rec and Park and the Department of Public Works, who've helped get this effort off the ground. And if there are constituents in the audience that have been working on this, I think I saw Jean Bogiachis. I also want to thank her personally for being the part of the team that's been the heart and soul in getting this effort off the ground. I also want to recognize Jonathan Goldberg, specifically from DPW. So colleagues, I really want to encourage you to support this groundbreaking legislation. It's an exciting time, and I look forward to having a conversation with you so that you can continue to see success in your district and possibly entertaining and creating a GBD. Thank you. The rest I will turn back over to you, Madam President.
Thank you. Supervisor Christensen.
I just want to glom on to Supervisor Cohen's enthusiasm. I think everybody knows I've been an enormous supporter of our CBDs and our BIDs, and as a supervisor and as a resident of District 3, I'm very, very grateful for the services that they provide and the leadership in improving our commercial district. I wanted to commend Michael Yarney, Loring Sagan, Luke Vasquez at Build Inc., who I know have been instrumental in this, and to congratulate the neighbors. I think this is a fantastic idea, and I'm looking for a GBD in District 3 as soon as we can do that.
Thank you. Our clerk has noticed a typo.
Thank you, Madam President. On page 6 of this document, Supervisor Cohen, on line 3, the date in the body of the document says June 9th. The date should be July 28th, the date I stated in my opening for this item.
So can someone make a motion to make that correction? Supervisor Cohen?
Thank you very much. I'll make a motion to change the date from June 9th to July 28th.
Okay, motioned by Supervisor Cohen, seconded by Supervisor Christensen. Can we take that amendment without objection? Without objection, the amendment passes.
Thank you.
And on the item as amended, colleagues, can we take it? Same house, same call. Without objection, this resolution passes as amended unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, members.
Madam Clerk, can you please call item number 37 and 38 together?
Item 37 and 38 were referred without recommendation from the Land Use and Transportation Committee. Item 37 is an ordinance to amend the Administrative Code to revise the residential unit conversion ordinance of among other provisions, require hosting platforms to verify that a residential unit is on the city registry prior to listing and removing a listing once a residential unit has been rented or for tourist or transient use for more than 60 days in a calendar year. Item 30, pardon me, Madam President.
Okay.
Item 38, ordinance to amend the administrative code to revise the residential unit conversion ordinance to, among other provisions, limit short-term rental of a residential unit to no more than 120 days per calendar year.
Thank you. Supervisor Farrell.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, so last year our board came together and passed the first regulatory framework for short-term rentals in our city. The topic that we all now know is extremely complicated with 1,000 different points of view, but ultimately we derived a framework that was a starting point. Since that time, our city departments, as well as other interested parties outside of City Hall, have continued to look at the legislation, its impacts, and its logistics, all towards an effort to continue to work to get the law right. I do believe that home sharing is here to stay in San Francisco, and we should support home sharing, but we must support it in a manner that protects our city's affordable housing stock, make sure that we streamline our registration process, and removes bureaucratic red tape for people who are looking to share their residences so that we can incentivize hosts to be good actors under the city law. Given our current housing shortage and affordability issues, we must ensure that we protect our city from turning into a city of solely short-term rentals and enact a framework that strikes the balance necessary to achieve that goal, so our residents can continue to live and thrive here, but also have an appropriate ability to share their home so they can make ends meet in what is now becoming the most expensive city in America. We know that home sharing is allowing seniors to earn extra needed income, help people earn extra money to pay off their mortgages, and help people pay their medical bills, and exposing visitors to non-traditional tourist areas that are patronizing our neighborhood small businesses. With all eyes on our city and San Francisco and how we continue to approach regulating short-term rentals, I do believe it's extremely important to strengthen and streamline our current framework and process. And I do believe that Mayor Lay's and my proposed amendments strike the right balance that we need. With that being said, our goal in putting forward these amendments from the beginning has always been to drive towards consensus where possible and to avoid a complicated measure being decided at the ballot. Deciding this issue at the ballot would lock the policy in stone and would be the wrong approach as we continue to work towards getting this policy right. As we all know, if it goes to the ballot and we want to simply change just a comma in the law, we have to go back to the voters. And if one thing that we've learned in this process over the past few years, if we contemplated issues around short-term rentals, that this is extremely complicated, but our sharing economy, which this is a part of, and I would imagine over the next few years we're going to be talking about regulating other parts of our sharing economy. This is a part of our economy that is here to stay, but is also in flux and changing and growing at a pace that's really challenging for our city government to get a hold of. We know that we are going to have to revisit this law much more frequently than other parts of the law that we continue to address here at the Board of Supervisors. The ballot measure also, in many regards, in my opinion, has been politically driven and not policy driven. I do believe that there are a number of advocates that I have very much appreciated a dialogue with, where we have even disagreed, certainly, on the underlying items, but that have approached us from a policy basis and not a political basis. And I look forward to continuing our dialogue together and even re-energizing those dialogues moving forward. And I also understand that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have other policy components they would continue to like time to discuss and sort out. And I would welcome these additional conversations on this complicated topic. From my perspective, we passed a framework last year. Now let's take the time to get it right. I know ultimately we'll get a policy crafted that protects our city's housing stock, in particular our affordable housing stock, which has to be the #1 goal. Incentivize hosts to be good actors under city law by streamlining a registration process, and making sure that we clarify elements of the law and fully fund it so that we ensure that the law that we pass here at the Board of Supervisors is fully enforceable. So with that all being said, I would like to make a motion, colleagues, to continue both items 37 and 38 for another month to our July 14th board meeting to give those time for those additional discussions to take place.
Supervisor Farrell has made a motion to continue items 37 and 38 to the meeting of July
14th,
2015. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Tang. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you. I would ask Supervisor Farrell, through the chair, if he could amend his motion to focus only on his item as the main author of one of the items. I would like to request a yes or no vote on my item. And so with that, I would like to respectfully request that out of deference and consideration as the main author, that his motion to continue apply to his item, but not mine.
Supervisor Farrell.
And I appreciate the comment very much so. I think from my perspective, there are items of both of these pieces of legislation that I would like to continue, and again, the point being to make sure that we continue to have a discussion on all these items. So I respect that very much so, but I would like to continue both of these items.
Okay. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you very much. I am disappointed by that move. I think that there has to be some consideration for the fact that as individuals we have different perspectives, but I think that we have in the past recognized some deference to the main author. That said, let me say this. That with all due respect to Supervisor Farrell and Mayor Lee, I want to be very clear. The last thing that we need in this building is to give the lobbyists of Airbnb more time to do what they have been doing in this building for the last couple of years.
May I remind the public that that no clapping is allowed during the board meetings, please. So if you could allow us an opportunity to deliberate in silence, we would really appreciate that. Thank you.
The reason that we are in this mess is because we have, as a city, decided to roll over for a $20 billion corporation and let that corporation write the laws that should be written by the elected legislators. Well, we have an opportunity to remedy that. And I think that we can have differences of opinion on this issue, but the issues that are before us have been talked to death, and there is no compromise when what the other side, in this case Airbnb, is presenting is a line that makes it clear that even though they're making millions of dollars, they believe that they have no responsibility whatsoever when it comes to the enforcement of this law. It is, how do you negotiate with someone who believes that they have no responsibility for what's happening to our neighborhoods? Now, last week, nearly 1,000 Mission residents came to these very chambers and gave heartfelt and painful testimony about how their lives are impacted by today's terrible housing crisis. The lack of affordable housing is without a doubt the most important issue facing San Francisco. The Mission community, and indeed communities across San Francisco, are confronting unbelievably high rents and housing prices, a dire lack of affordable housing, soaring evictions, and then, to make matters worse, thousands of unregistered and therefore illegal Airbnb rentals for tourists that take even more housing off the limited housing we have. The legislation I have before you today is about common sense regulation that will protect housing for San Francisco residents. Many of you in this chamber spoke last week about your reluctance to support a temporary moratorium on luxury housing due to the fear that somehow that could remove possible housing from the market. Well, what we are dealing with today is the fact that Airbnb rentals are doing precisely that. They're removing long-term housing opportunities for San Francisco residents across the city. Our chief economist, Ted Egan, stated that even removing one single unit of housing from the cities through short-term rentals has a negative economic impact on the city, even taking into consideration the potential tourist dollars and additional host income. The budget and legislative analyst report on this matter states that Airbnb alone is taking between 925 to 1960, close to 2,000 entire units off the market citywide, which is up to 23% of otherwise vacant units in the city. The mayor recently announced a $250 million bond, now up to $300 million, and we thank Mayor Lee for responding to the mission. And he proposes that for the purpose of creating and building affordable housing. And yet, when you look at the amount of the bond, if we're lucky, we will be able to build a little over 1,000 units of affordable housing. This means that we will be asking the taxpayers of San Francisco to replace half of what is being lost because of Airbnb rentals. It is simply not fair for us to ask the voters to pony up for the actions of a $20 billion corporation. In the Mission, up to 40% of vacant units are Airbnb rentals. In the Haight, it is 43%. In the Castro, it is 35%. And in Potrero Hill, it is 32%. It is the neighborhoods with the highest number of evictions that see the largest number of Airbnb rentals. The legislation that I have introduced with Supervisors Mar and Avalos as co-sponsors creates a short-term rental law that actually works to protect housing by adding real enforcement mechanisms. It specifically requires hosting platforms to list only registered units, requiring them to provide quarterly data to the city, and creating a 60-day limit on short-term rentals. The budget and legislative analyst states that an enforced 60-day cap would lead to a 27% reduction of Airbnb units, entirely focused on commercial units, which the report defines as units that are taking resident housing off the market permanently. A 120-day cap that has been proposed by the mayor and Supervisor Farrell would only lead to a 7% reduction in Airbnb units, leaving many commercial Airbnb units untouched, which is not something that we can afford in this city. As I have said on many occasions, I support home sharing with limits. I support casual hosts who are using this as a way to make ends meet. I understand that for many San Franciscans, this is something that is needed. However, left unregulated, this industry will continue to exacerbate the housing crisis we are facing by incentivizing taking housing off the housing market. Colleagues, I ask for your support, and let me go through some of the key points in my legislation. One, prohibiting hosting platforms from listing units not on the city's short-term rental registry and fining those platforms if they fail to do so. Under current law, hosting platforms can continue to profit from illegal listings without any accountability for facilitating illegal activity. There are more than 5,000 San Francisco listings currently on Airbnb alone and 1,200 on VRBO. Holding the platforms themselves accountable and imposing the fines will make sure that this illegal activity stops. Anne Marie Rogers of the Planning Department, as well as Commissioner Dennis Richards and Commissioner Cindy Wu, have all referred to these penalties as the linchpin to the city's enforcement of this law. Number two, requiring hosting platforms to provide data to the Planning Department. This amendment was something that the Planning Department had repeatedly asked for months to help them with their enforcement efforts. The budget and legislative analysts also recommended that this data be required. Businesses in San Francisco are already required to report all kinds of data on all kinds of activity to the city and county of San Francisco. This regulation brings hosts in line with the laws of other small businesses. Many companies, not just Airbnb, provide data to the city to enforce the law, and why should we treat Airbnb any different? Number three, have the Planning Department redact private information. To ensure that any data that is collected by the planning department is protected, we want to make sure that addresses are redacted for privacy concerns. My legislation calls on the redaction of all street and unit numbers of any residents in the short-term rental registry. In addition, the names of the permanent residents would be redacted. So to the extent that the issue of privacy has been used as a justification, we have a long history of the city protecting the privacy of confidential information, and that is not going to change because of this requirement. Number 4, allowing interested parties to go to court and to allow them to collect civil penalties. Bottom line is that people need protections. This law would allow neighbors to go to court in a timely way if the city has not addressed their concerns. This amendment is about ensuring that we are using all available resources to enforce the law. The city does not and will not have the resources to take all of the enforcement efforts that are needed. Creating a strong private right of action can be thought of as a type of enforcement sharing. Where the city cannot take on the platforms in particular egregious cases, we don't want to restrict the ability of people in our neighborhoods, regular people, from taking those on. And civil penalties are important so that it's not only wealthy people, but working class people, middle income people who can take bad actors to court. Number 5, notifying neighbors in a building when a completed application is accepted. Under current law, the building owner is notified when a full application for short-term rentals has been accepted by the planning department. My law extends this notification to other permanent residents in the building. I believe neighbors have a right to know that there will be a short-term rental happening in that building. And then number 6, limiting all short-term rentals to 60 days per year. A 60-day limit would allow casual hosts to continue to Airbnb their homes over the summer, when a vacation, or when they need to supplement their income, but it would limit those rentals so that we address the issue of the proliferation of commercial Airbnbs in San Francisco by ensuring that landlords are not incentivized to evict tenants from those buildings. For evicted tenants like Susan Wetzel, whose landlord evicted her to put her unit on Airbnb, an enforced 60-day cap could have made all the difference in helping her stay in her unit. She lived in a Castro unit and paid $1,700 a month for rent after living there for 11 years. Her landlord then evicted her to do year-round Airbnb rentals. He is making 5 times what she paid in rent, and he now charges $250 a night for that unit. If there was a 60-day cap which would permit Airbnb rentals 5 days a month, he could only make $1,250 a month converting her unit, and therefore would not have the incentive to kick this person out. If the cap was 120 days, as the mayor and Supervisor Farrell proposed, this landlord would still make a profit from evicting Susan, because that would mean that he could rent it out to 10 days a month, and he could make $2,500 a month, $800 a month more than the rent. This cap allows for casual Airbnb use, but would help protect tenants like Susan. Colleagues, bottom line is that we need strong measures and effective enforcement to ensure that this industry doesn't continue to exacerbate the current housing crisis, and what I have presented precisely does that. The fact that Airbnb rentals are taking housing off the market in the middle of a brutal housing crisis is simply unacceptable to me. We need to act now. And let me just conclude that for those of us who see what Airbnb is doing to our neighborhoods, the fact that this board chooses not to act today and instead chooses, if that's what happens, to continue the matter and wait and continue to give Airbnb the ability to do what they have done, which is influence this building, that to me is a sign of inaction by this Board of Supervisors. And even though we don't want to go to the ballot, when faced with inaction, by the elected body, we may have no choice but to go to the ballot and let the voters do what the Board of Supervisors should have done a long time ago, which is to make sure that this $20 billion corporation plays by the rules like everyone else.
Thank you.
Madam President, I will respectfully remind the audience that the board has an adopted rule that applause and vocal expression of support or opposition is not allowed in the chamber.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I know that it is always very tempting to if someone has a different point of view than you have, to dismiss that person by saying, well, you can't possibly have your own opinion based on what your constituents need or want. It must be because a major corporation or lobbyists or whoever else you want to demonize is somehow influencing you and telling you what your opinion is. Last I checked, we were all elected by our constituents, and we are accountable to those constituents. So I want to talk about why it is that I have the opinion.
Excuse me. Hissing is included in those kinds of vocal expressions. So if you want to continue along those lines, I will ask the sheriff deputies to remove people from the audience. Thank you. Supervisor Weiner. Can you please, ma'am, you are out of order. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you, Madam President. So I want to explain why it is that I have the view that I have, which is that Supervisor Campos's legislation respectfully goes too far and is not the appropriate response to this issue. Frankly, I don't care what Airbnb needs or wants. I don't care what its lobbyists need or want. I don't care what VRBO or Craigslist or any of the other companies need or want. What I care about is what my constituents need and want, and that is the only thing that guides me. There were a lot of references in the previous comments to the Castro. Well, as a guy who represents the Castro and Noe Valley and Glen Park and other neighborhoods, I know these neighborhoods, and I have talked to so many people living in my district who they are on the edge, hanging on to stay in this town, and by being able to rent out a room as a short-term rental in their home where they live, that is what is the difference for them. It is what allows them to make their mortgage. It's what allows them to put their kid through college. It's what allows them to survive in this town. And it is very, very real. And I'm glad to hear that Supervisor Campos acknowledges that there are many people in this town who are residents in these units who are making ends meet through short-term rentals in a spare room. But I think we need to be very clear that 60 days is not going to meet the needs of these people, and they won't be able to make ends meet. You can't just say that you understand the concerns and the needs of these people who are using short-term rentals to make ends meet. You can't just say that when you're proposing legislation that's going to restrict them to 60 days for the entire year, that's going to allow their neighbors to sue them and get penalties against them and attorney's fees and everything else, that you're going to require data sharing and so on and so forth. You can't just say it. You have to look at what's being proposed. What's being proposed is going to hurt a lot of San Francisco residents who are not wealthy, who are not Airbnb, who are not lobbyists, but who are regular people living in this town, many long-term residents who simply want to stay here. And so, the rhetoric around this issue is just extraordinary. I think when you actually focus on what people actually need and the needs of our residents, it is very, very clear that this proposal is not going to meet those needs, is going to have a lot of harmful effects for many residents in this town, and that's why I absolutely cannot support it. I am not going to support legislation that is so restrictive. I am not going to support legislation that, frankly, encourages neighbors to start running around suing each other to get penalties against each other. That is not what we want to encourage. What we need is legislation legislation that cracks down on the bad actors who are abusing short-term rentals, the units that are being converted into pure short-term rentals, the abusive behavior. Absolutely, we need to crack down on that, while allowing people who are not abusing the system, who are simply trying to make ends meet, to do so. Now, I want to talk about enforcement. And I made some of these comments during the Land Use Committee hearing. This legislation went into effect on February 1st, and promptly thereafter, it was proclaimed that the legislation was a failure and couldn't be enforced. We never even tried to enforce it, and how could we have tried to enforce it when it was proclaimed a failure within about a month of it going into effect? How can people get up and say that this is unenforceable when there hasn't even been an opportunity to enforce it? The department is trying to get people registered. People are trying to register and, frankly, having a heck of a time doing it. People are trying to pay their hotel taxes and having a heck of a time doing it, due to some weird dispute between the tax collector's office and Airbnb. And to turn around and say it's going into effect, a month has gone by, it's a failure, we have to just tear this up and start over again, I just don't get that. I'm going to support this continuance because I do think that we need some more time to see if we can come up with some good solutions that allow us to enforce against the abusers while not harming the many San Franciscans who are relying on these short-term rentals.
Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. Want to make a couple of comments about both proposed ordinances that are before us today and the continuance. There are four primary issues that I want to discuss. Number one, of course, being the hard cap. The hard cap issue was the number one issue for me during the discussions last fall over the debate around short-term rentals. It was really clear to me then, and still is, that enforcement is impossible the way the legislation is currently written. Short of giving everyone that registers an electronic monitoring bracelet, there is really no way for the city and the planning department to know whether a host has slept in their unit that night or not. And I had brought up an example previously where I felt that government could do overreaching ways that really would violate someone's privacy to get an understanding of that. And I just don't want the city to engage in that type of investment. I'm glad to see that both proposals that are moving forward have a hard cap on hosted and unhosted nights. I think that that will go at great length to ensuring that the city can ensure that these units that are being placed for short-term rentals are really just short-term rentals and not vacant units that are being left off of our rental housing stock at a time when housing is at its crisis here in San Francisco. While I was open in the fall to going up to 90 days, which is technically 1 week a month or a 3-month summer, I would support at this point Supervisor David Campos' legislation at 75 days. I'm, again, open to going up, but I don't think going up beyond 3 months makes sense. And I'll say this, I agree that there are residents in San Francisco that depend on this type of income and business in order to perhaps pay for their mortgage, their children's college education, to help with their retirement. But we actually have a process in place currently for those residents to engage in that type of business, and that's by applying for a bed and breakfast conditional use. And I have not seen yet, in my entire time on the Board of Supervisors, any bed and breakfast conditional use permit be rejected by the planning department. This is the process that we have in place to allow residents to use their place of housing as additional form of income and to run a business. So you can stay here in San Francisco. You can be a senior citizen who has that extra bedroom. You can be a person on disability that may not be able to work in a traditional job that's able to actually run a hotel in your home. And we have a process at the planning department to determine whether that is appropriate or not, and we can keep track of that type of business use. The second item that I wanted to talk about was on the requirement that hosting platforms only list units that legally comply and obtain a registration number proving that they aren't a vacant unit being taken out of the rental market. I think that this is absolutely key to this legislation. I've heard the argument that this is overly burdensome and unprecedented to have a business act as an enforcement entity. But I'm going to give a simple example of actually something that most of us engage in a daily basis, where we actually ask businesses to act as an enforcement body for government, and that is those that sell tobacco and liquor. We expect our small business owners to ID every customer to check whether they are 18 or 21 in order to buy a pack of cigarettes or to buy a six-pack at the liquor store or to even get a glass of wine over dinner. Excuse me. So I would argue that this is not unprecedented. This is something that we ask businesses to do on a daily basis. And I think it'd be far simpler for our hosting platforms to be able to comply with this piece than what we ask many of our small business owners to do on a daily basis to enforce legislation that we think is incredibly important for the health and safety of our city. The third piece is on the private right of action. And I think we should be clear that even the legislation that passed in the fall, written by then President David Chu, actually allows for a private right of action. What we see in the two ordinances before us today is actually an expedited right of action, one for 135 days, the other for 90 days. The reason why I think that this expedited private right of action is important is that we have seen how it was incredibly key and critical to the hotel conversion ordinance passed in the early 1990s, which preserves our deeply affordable single residency occupancy hotels from being converted into 100% tourist hotels. We understood in the 90s that our SRO hotels were an important part of our low-income and affordable housing stock. That ordinance was never effectively enforced until qualified community-based organizations won the right to enforce on behalf of the public interest. And in the 25 years' time since that ordinance is passed, there is no evidence that even a single frivolous lawsuit has ever been filed. Over the years, the ability to pursue private right of action has been critical to enforcing federal and state civil rights statutes, including laws that prohibit employment discrimination, police brutality, hate crimes, water pollution, immigration fraud, and more. We currently have a backlog of 1,200 complaints at the planning department today, not all on short-term rentals, but it does showcase a need for our private citizens to engage as partners to ensure that we as a city can enforce laws that are here to protect our housing stock. Now, in terms of why we should have an expedited private right of action, I think most of us here in this room have been, unfortunately, in the unhappy situation of living next to an inconsiderate or maybe outright bad neighbor. You and I know that every single day in that situation feels like an eternity. Without this amendment, if you file a complaint with the city, you may wait 75 days or more before you get to be heard by an administrative officer, and 105 days or more, which is 3.5 months before you even receive a final decision. Meanwhile, the violations are continuing and you have zero recourse. People don't want to and shouldn't need to wait months and months before they can obtain relief. The resident in Russian Hill, who spoke at public comment at Land Use Committee back in September, is a perfect example of someone who needs an expedited private right of action. She had been living next to a full-time vacation rental for fraternities for 1.5 years, and that is frankly inexcusable, and that was when short-term rentals were completely illegal. Bad actors shouldn't receive months of free license to continue breaking the law before they're faced with real consequences. The final piece that I wanted to address today, which is also controversial, is the data sharing piece. I do have some hesitations around this, and only because I'm reminded of Lavabit's CEO's courageous actions a year ago to shut down his company when he provided secure email services to 410,000 people, including Edward Snowden, in order to avoid handing over the password of his customers to the FBI. While handing over the text of private emails is wholly different from asking for the number of nights per registration number, I would like to develop parameters under which government asks for data from the companies that are within our jurisdiction. While this is not my area of policy expertise, I'd like to really set what we believe are parameters for when we require data sharing outside of the subpoena process. I think that this is something that we can continue to talk about. I also have some hesitations about this piece because I don't think it will help with companies like HomeAway and VRBO, which do not actually facilitate the transaction of the rental. Parties can exchange money, numbers of nights outside of this platform, so it won't actually enforce the 90-day hard cap. And it also doesn't prevent a registration number or a unit owner from using multiple platforms and therefore getting several 90-day limits. I just wanted to express some of my hesitations around that. It doesn't mean that I will not support it moving forward. I'm already committed to supporting the legislation as authored by Supervisor David Campos today. But I do think it's important in the long term for local government to really think about what our parameters are around asking when we request data sharing on a regular basis from the companies here in San Francisco. Finally, I just want to say, in positive note, I do think we're moving forward in the right direction. I do want to thank our many individuals that engage in short-term rental, and of course Airbnb, for not only paying their hotel taxes, but also committing to pay all the back taxes as well. I think that really is a good faith effort as we move forward in this discussion. I still think that one proposal that is before us today is far stronger than the other. I will not be supporting the continuance. I don't see a lot of dialogue happening between the two parties that are at stake currently. We'll be supporting Supervisor David Campos's legislation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Marr.
Thank you, President Breed. I wanted to start by just saying that I think the privacy concern that Supervisor Kim just brought up is a bogus issue. All that would be required of online platforms is to turn over the address and the number of nightly booked nights and to verify the compliance. I think it's really critical that, similar to other small businesses, that's the requirement. So I think it's a bogus issue. But I wanted to say that I think Supervisor Campos has sharply framed this issue as who should in San Francisco should be writing laws. Should it be neighborhoods and community groups, or should it be now from a $10 billion now to a $20 billion corporation whose lobbyists have been all over this building for many, many months? I wanted to also say that our planning department staff, not just Anne Marie Rogers, but our zoning administrator and others are here. They very clearly said to us that it's really unenforceable unless we get the hosting platforms to comply. I think the Campos, Avalos, Marr legislation really does that in a very strategic way. I wanted to say, too, that requiring the hosting platforms to comply is really critical. Also, Fred Brousseau from our Budget and Legislative Analyst Office has the data. I mean, the Campos legislation is data-driven. It shows the loss of 1,960 units or more, and I think it's really critical that we're keeping that context in our housing crisis, not harming the casual home sharers, but really looking at a process that's now proliferating where we're seeing displacement of tenants for luxury vacation rentals, for tourists, and for profit in the city. I think sharebettersf.com has a great map that I'm looking at right now in front of me of the proliferation of VRBO, Airbnb, and other rentals. You could zone in on my own home, and I could see all the different increase in the rentals around me. I think it's a hotelization of neighborhoods. I think the process that Supervisor Campos with the legislation has put together is a reasonable one. That's why I'm supportive of it. But I think if anybody has any questions, sharebettersf.com is a really great place for some of that data. Lastly, I go to other documents as this debate has been going on. The Sleazy 16 is a group of short-term rental abusers that have been displacing tenants for tourists. It's grown since that website was developed, but you could even just see specifically how people are profiting off the industry. I think reasonable controls as set by the legislation that is Campos, Avalos, Marr is a real reasonable way for us as neighborhoods to take back San Francisco from this proliferation of hotelization and privatization of different neighborhoods. So I urge my colleagues to support the Campos legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you. I'd like to motion to terminate debate and move forward on the vote on the underlying legislation.
Okay, the motion to terminate debate is not debatable and requires 2 seconds and 8 votes to pass. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Campos, and there has to be an additional second
Supervisor Marr.
by Supervisor Marr. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
On the motion to terminate debate, Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang?
No.
Tang, no. Supervisor Wiener?
No.
Wiener, no. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos?
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
No.
Breed, no. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Christensen?
No.
Christensen, no. Supervisor Cohen?
No.
Cohen, no. Supervisor Farrell?
No.
Farrell, no. Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. There are 5 ayes and 6 noes.
The motion fails. Supervisor Christensen.
Colleagues, I'll try not to take that personally. So a couple of things. I understand Supervisor Campos's impatience, and in many ways I share it. I've only been on this board 5 months. I was not part of the 2 years of discussion that preceded the legislation that this board passed last year. But as a new supervisor, I've certainly seen the impacts of hoteling on my district. A lot of the tourist attractions in San Francisco are located in District 3. We have aging housing stock. I've seen the lock boxes in my canvassing and walking the neighborhood. I can count the buildings within a 2-block radius of my home that have been completely hoteled prior to my coming upon this board, so I get the problem. I also, like Supervisor Wiener, have a lot of constituents who are hanging on in San Francisco by the skin of their teeth. And I've got seniors on pensions. I've got a few disabled people that I've met personally who are managing to stay in North Beach because they get a little extra money every now and again by renting out a couch or a space in their house. I think we're all sympathetic to the need to distinguish the sleazy 16 and the bad actors and the speculators from those small home sharers. I don't think we've found a way to do it yet. And I think paying lip service to their needs is very different from actually addressing them. So I'm troubled about that aspect of this. And Supervisor Campos, my inclination to table this is not to try to put it aside. It is because I think you've got some good things in your legislation, some things that I could support, but there are aspects of it that are troubling to me that make it difficult for me to vote for it. And I don't know if there is something in between and a way to address some of the ongoing issues that I have that would possibly get us to something that would meet the needs of my constituents and satisfy the concerns of this hoteling and the evictions, which I very much want to stop. And I do think it's important to remember, as Supervisor Kim pointed out, we can demonize Airbnb, but the fact is they control less than half the market, and we can pass this legislation and focus on a solution that's specifically focused at their business model. Everybody's just going to go someplace else. The worst actors in my district don't rent on Airbnb. They have their own websites. And I do think we've got a piece of legislation that's only 6 months old. I think it indicates how difficult this question is for the board and for this city, that we're still trying to talk about how to make that legislation work. And I can assure all my colleagues that I am eager to find a real solution. I am just troubled by aspects of both proposals and hopeful that we can iron out those issues and come to something that we actually feel will work. There have been a lot of magic solutions proposed at this board in the last couple of weeks, and it's been very hard not to bow to the emotion and the concerns of the people that are being affected by these things. But I continue to look for real solutions that actually function. So let me just close by saying, my inclination to table these for just a little longer to see if we can iron out the lumps is not disrespectful or an effort to obfuscate or to drag feet, but just an effort to get it right. And that's my goal.
Thank you, Supervisor Christensen. Supervisor Cohen.
Supervisor Kim is before.
Actually, Supervisor Kim has already spoken, and based on the board rules, those who have not spoken take precedent. Supervisor Cohen.
Oh, well, thank you. So I'm a little disheartened on the conversation, that what I'm hearing about the way the framing of a continuance. And it's interesting because, I mean, a continuance would allow us to have a pause, right? Just last week we had 8 hours of commentary about a pause for the mission moratorium. And there are very valuable points within both pieces of legislation that I like. I think the one thing that I'm concerned about, and I'm happy, I hope Supervisor Campos will speak to it a little bit, is the one thing that concerns me is that you focus on one half of the coin, on the evictions and the displacement, but I'd love for you to help come up with a solution or a strategy for those constituents. You highlighted figures from District 10, particularly calling out for Potrero Hill. There are statistics and numbers that are also in District 10 in the baby community where people, much like those that are in the Mission and other parts of the city, are struggling just to stay in San Francisco. And these are not the folks that have the ability to come and sit in the chamber and listen to hours of dialogue and discussion, but are still just as committed and just as affected by is committed to the legislation and affected by the legislation. So that is one thing that I'm lacking, that I'm hearing from on how do we reconcile those folks that live in their house, that are putting their kids through college, that are teachers and that are subsidizing their income, that are seniors, and that are trying to be industrious and resourceful and to remain inside San Francisco. So a continuance for me would help us to further that conversation. Now, there are some things in here that I really like. Units that have had an Ellis Act eviction cannot be a short-term rental. That is absolutely the right direction to go in. I think that Supervisor Moore, you mentioned about the sleazy 16. The one thing that I want to be really cautious is that we're not taking a sledgehammer when we should be using a scalpel to begin to carve through the... Thank you. To carve through the legislation. They say timing is everything, ladies and gentlemen. So for me, a continuance is not posturing or throwing or trying to stop the process, but honestly, it's to begin to create a piece of legislation that is absolutely that we can all get behind, that we all can begin to support, and that will be the answer. This is not going to be easy. This is very complex, as we can see. We've been dealing with it for 2 years. Now, so I just, I was uncomfortable with that rhetoric. I feel the passion, and I certainly understand the direction, but I just want to be sure that, again, we're not using a sledgehammer when we should be using a scalpel. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to some of the comments from my colleagues. I think that today I will be supporting a continuance as well, and really because, again, as some of my colleagues have already said, I do see pieces in both legislation that I would agree with. So, for example, as Supervisor Cohen just mentioned in item 38 in the Mayor and Supervisor Farrell's piece, one of the issues that we're trying to address is with evictions. Their piece says that a unit cannot be subject of eviction within 5 years of an application if the eviction occurred after November 1st, 2014. Are there ways that we can strengthen that provision? I do like in Supervisor Campos's piece in terms of upon registration application that there must be notice mailed to all residents in a building, to an HOA, to neighborhood groups that have requested notification. I like that there is the sharing of data and information from the hosting platform, including a registration number, and we can use that to compare against some of the information in our city databases. So really, I think that there are several other pieces that I see a compromise on. And one point that I do want to make, though, in terms of the dialogue and how it started out was, there's this thought that there are many, many egregious actors, and then but there are really those that many in my neighborhood, for example, who are perfectly fine residents who have not disturbed any of their neighbors, who own single-family homes, and have made many friends around the world through this type of a program. And I think to characterize that everyone is a bad actor and that it's all about Airbnb, I think is absurd. It's I think, as Supervisor Christian then said, it's many of our single-family property owners who have come to me in our office saying that, we wouldn't like any sort of cap, but I'm willing to compromise on both sides and say that, sure, we should consider some sort of limitation, respecting both sides that have a stake in this issue. And so that's really why I would like to seek a continuance today. It's really that I think there are pieces of both that I can support.
Thank you. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, President Bree. I originally had wanted to make amendments to one of the legislation, but I'm going to hold off because what I'm hearing, and I'm going to take people's word for it, that I'm hearing discussion about whether we could or could not come together in the next few weeks to compromise something. And what I'm hearing is that there's some willingness. I think there are pieces of Supervisor Campos' legislation that I would definitely would support and like to see as a compromise piece of it. I'm hoping that the sincerity that I'm hearing today of people willing to do that, especially what Supervisor Katie Tang said in regards to the sharing of the information of who's registering, who's actually advertising and so forth, is an important piece as far as I'm concerned in terms of being able to enforce anything we put up there. So I'll be supporting the continuance with the caveat that I feel like there's some sincerity in this discussion to compromise.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Supervisor Kim.
So speaking specifically about the continuance, the one thing I will say is that my understanding is that over the last 8 months, since October, there has been discussions between parties about coming to one ordinance that would come before the board. And over the last 8 months, we have not seen those discussions to come to fruition yet. And I guess I'm not convinced that one more month is going to get us there. And I guess I would ask the initiator of the motion to ask for an additional month, whether he has indication that there is going to be movement between the two parties. If there is, great. I have to agree with Supervisor Katie Tang. I would love for one ordinance to be before the board today. There are aspects of both pieces of legislation that I would like to see accordingly. I'm ready to vote on the legislation that I think is the stronger piece of legislation, one that would actually address our housing crisis and would address what we're seeing, which is housing stock that's actually being removed from the city. And that is exactly what we're trying to address through passing regulation on short-term rentals. It's not that we're against short-term rentals. We want to make sure that is exactly what people are doing, that they're merely using a room, a couch in their room, in their house for folks that are coming into the city for tourism reasons, but we're not actually taking units off of the market. And that's something that we're not just seeing here in San Francisco. We're seeing this in cities around the world, and that's why cities globally are acting on this issue, because they're seeing a shortage of housing units for people that actually want to live in the city. That is why we have a planning code. We have places where people get to live. We have places where people get to do hotel, where people get to have businesses, where people get to do manufacturing. And this legislation will get us to that place. And so this legislation is actually a solution to the housing crisis, not just a pause. But what I would ask Supervisor Farrell is if he has indication that there is going to be movement over the next couple months and we can get to a place of one ordinance in July.
Supervisor Farrell.
Thanks, and I appreciate the question. I think from my perspective, I'll go back to a little bit what Supervisor Wiener said. To me, it's not parties on both sides. I also don't care what one company or one advocate in particular says. To me, it's also about giving us a dialogue here at the Board of Supervisors and that chance to exist. And amongst the colleagues, I think what we've seen as well during the discussion today is that we have people who like different parts of these legislation. I respect that. And some people haven't focused on it as much as I know a lot of us have over the past 2 years, if you will. But there continue to be good ideas that are thrown about. And from my perspective, I want to get this legislation right. So I think to me, a continuance is as much about hearing from community members. Without a doubt, I will continue to do so, but also having a dialogue within members of the Board of Supervisors to make sure their ideas are vetted and so forth when we have the vote.
Supervisor Kim, is that it? Thank you. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you. Colleagues, I don't have a lot of faith that in a month's time we're going to be able to find a compromised version of this legislation. I really see that this legislation is clearly taking a side about how we're going to protect or not protect our housing stock, our rental housing stock in San Francisco, and we're doing it in favor of Airbnb. A vote for continuance is really a vote for Airbnb. I've never actually even seen one of our colleagues actually continue another person's legislation. If a colleague wants wants to have legislation to be voted on, that's the colleague's prerogative to have his or her legislation voted on. That is being denied someone today. One of our colleagues mentioned being offended, not because I terminated the vote. I think what's actually offensive is that we're actually forcing a continuance on another colleague's legislation. That, to me, is what's at stake here. That's what we're actually willing to do to make sure that we can greenlight Airbnb's way of doing business in San Francisco, that we are showing through our budget analyst report. And we had 7.5 hours of people testifying last week about how hard it is finding places to live and seeing people lose their housing, how much is at stake in San Francisco, and what we are losing in terms of housing stock. If we had those same people here in our room this week, we know there'd be a lot of pressure on us to do otherwise. They're not here, so we don't feel that pressure. Imagine them here. They're still seeking a way out of the dire straits of losing housing stock in San Francisco. And if we vote to continue today, if we vote against firmer regulations, Airbnb, we're saying that their voices don't matter. That's clearly what we're saying and what's at stake in San Francisco today. I really appreciate the work that Supervisor Campos has made on this legislation. I appreciate our willingness to come together, look at compromise, but waiting a month is not going to provide the compromise and not to give us the answers that we seek.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank my colleagues for all their comments, and I certainly want to say to Supervisor Cohen, I actually appreciate the question of the pause, and I think consistent with your support of the pause around the mission, I can see the point. But let me put it to you this way. I think that I would be in a different place as a supervisor for District 9 and specifically for the mission as a neighborhood if the vote last week had gone differently. The reality is that as people are asking to give Airbnb 30 days, the mission was denied 45 days last week. And if that 45 days had been given to the mission so that they could have at least, as a community, had a fighting chance to preserve land that they wanted to build affordable housing on, then maybe I would be in a different place. I also would be in a different place if the concept of a pause didn't just expand to this, apply to this board of supervisors pausing action for 30 days, but also apply to Airbnb pausing the illegal listing of thousands of units, so that maybe if that happened, the hundreds of people that are being evicted in places like the mission would have a chance to stay in San Francisco. The thing about a pause is that when you do it or not do it, there are consequences. And so I am here with a sense of urgency because of what's happening in my district. You know what? I trust Supervisor Wiener that he knows the caster better than I do. I know the mission better than he does. It's just the nature of district elections. But that's the thing about the pause, is that given the totality of what is facing this neighborhood, we need to act. And I will say this, that I actually feel bad for the people on both sides that have been coming to this building, because I know it's not easy, whether you're for or against Airbnb rentals, to come to this building as often as people have come. I feel bad for them. And it would be a different story if I saw that we actually had the ability to find that middle ground, because when it comes down to it, this is really the key question here. Do you believe that Airbnb and other platforms should share in the responsibility of enforcing the law? If you don't believe that they should, then you're not going to agree to provide data, requiring them to provide data. You're not going to agree that they should only list units that have been registered. So, pauses are things that, as a general rule, I would be open to, but in the context of this neighborhood, this community, the mission, which was denied a 45-day pause, I say, let's act today. And if we can deny the mission 45 days, why should we give Airbnb 30 days?
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Farrell.
Thank you, Madam President. And colleagues, I'll make two quick comments. There's a lot to be talked about in the merits, and I hope we do so going forward. I will say two things. One, I take the point about continuing another member's piece of legislation. Let me remind my colleagues, 2 years ago I introduced legislation around TICs and condo conversions. And not only did this board not just vote to continue my item, this board voted to completely basically gut my item and completely change the intent of it. So from my perspective, just continuing another person's item is less than half of what happened to a piece of legislation that I introduced. And people in this board chambers were on both sides of that aisle, and I respect that. But to come back and say that continuing the item therefore is offensive when what was done a few years ago was even more egregious, from my perspective, is a little bit disingenuous. From a second perspective, and I'm heartened by some of the comments, I think as we move forward, I will reiterate, I don't care what one company, Airbnb or otherwise, thinks, or what one advocate group or a group of them thinks together. As Supervisor Wiener mentioned, we're here to represent our constituents. We're also here to represent the city of San Francisco as a whole. And when Airbnb right now, and I get it's an easy political scapegoat, represents less than half of the total listings here in the city of San Francisco, from my perspective, I hope if we do continue this item and succeed in doing so, that we look at legislation and parts of the legislation that will address this issue as a whole. If more than half of the units listed in the city of San Francisco are on a different platform that are not regulated by this legislation or are not touched because they don't own the data or so forth or get shut down, then we need to take a different approach and a more holistic approach. And from my perspective, colleagues, I hope that we can, if we do continue this item, which I hope we will, that we address it in that manner as a whole.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Supervisor Campos.
Supervisor Farrell, you and I have worked together, and I have a lot of respect for you. And I think, it just happens here that we have a different perspective. I think what's challenging about the point is that, Airbnb wasn't talking about other platforms until now. It wasn't saying that when it was Airbnb that was writing the law. It wasn't thinking about other platforms at that time. And the reason why we are talking about Airbnb is because it is the law, they wrote it, and it's having an impact. And beyond that, the numbers that we know based on the analysis that was done shows that Airbnb as a company is impacting the housing stock. And so, I respect your position. I respect where you're coming from. But I think that we owe it to the public to act. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Christensen.
To summarize, so last week we heard that the moratorium, we heard from people who thought that the moratorium was going to stop evictions, was going to protect artists, was going to preserve the flavor of the mission. I didn't believe that the moratorium was going to do those things, but I was told that if we just had 45 days, somehow that would magically happen, and I just couldn't believe it. Today, we're being told that in 30 days or 45 days, we can't hammer this legislation into something that will really work. And frankly, this legislation only addresses a portion of the problem, and not even the major portion. And I think there are things we can do. I mean, Supervisor Kim, more eloquently than I have, listed all the reasons why I think that there's still some problematic aspects of this. And if we can craft something, and I think, is this the final step that forces people to come to the table and hammer something out? I've seen this board do that repeatedly. If there's a way to bring something good out of this that actually addresses the issues, then I think we should try. And I continue to think that paying, lip service to the concerns of the small sharers while not actually dealing with it, it's more magical thinking, and I'm looking for real thinking.
Thank you, Supervisor Christensen. Supervisor Kim.
I just want to correct two things. One, we're comparing apples to oranges. Continuing a legislation for 30 days is not the equivalent of a 45-day moratorium. It's not the same thing. And this legislation actually addresses evictions. We're actually trying to protect our rental housing stock by putting in place regulation on short-term rentals, which is rating our housing stock here in San Francisco. So the longer we put off putting actual enforceable tools and mechanisms to make sure that people aren't incentivized to not rent out to long-term tenants and therefore use their residential units as hotels, we are actually exacerbating our housing crisis and the incentive for eviction for another 30 days. So I just think that those are two different things. Secondly, I did point out some concerns I have about both proposals. And like I said, while neither are perfect, I do still think that moving forward with one is incredibly important for the reasons that I already enumerated. I shared some concerns that I have about the overall concept of data sharing. I don't think that there's an equivalent between the example that I brought up about sharing people's private emails and the content of that email to sharing the number of nights that a host rents out to a tourist, is the equivalent type of data sharing. That being said, if we as a city government are going to dive into that policy area of data sharing, I would feel more comfortable knowing that we had a larger policy discussion in the long term about when we do that and when we don't, so that we set parameters and make sure that we're really protecting the valid privacy and security rights of our residents. So in this case, I don't think that we are overreaching in terms of privacy matters, but as long as we're going to delve into this policy matter, I do think it's important for us as a city and a body to have a long-term discussion about when we decide to do that and when we don't. It would have been ideal for us to have that discussion prior to us moving forward with this ordinance. That being said, I think there are just so many things at stake with short-term rentals. We know that this is impacting our housing market. We know that people are getting evicted because property owners have decided that short-term rental is more lucrative or easier to do. So that is why I think that we should move forward today.
Thank you. Supervisor Campos.
Look, with all due respect to Supervisor Christensen, and I certainly respect where you're coming from, I think that...
I'm sorry, excuse me, I need you to remove your signs. Signs they're prohibited in the board chamber. Can you please remove your signs? Thank you. Supervisor Campos.
Just with all due respect to Supervisor Christensen, I know that you disagree with my perspective, but I don't think that it's appropriate for you to refer to what I'm doing as not thinking. The fact that you disagree with someone doesn't mean that we haven't thought about what we're proposing. You may not agree with it, but it is thinking, respectfully. We have put a lot of time and energy into this, and not just me in my office, but a broad coalition. I think that we have to be careful how we interact with one another, and we can disagree and still be respectful of the positions that we're trying to put forward. I think that we owe that, because it's not just me that is here. I'm here to represent a community that has a perspective. So I just want to note that. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify one point, because I've been hearing some of these points talked about, and I want to make sure we're all clear on this. One thing that we are very concerned about, I think all parties, no matter which piece of legislation you support, is about the evictions. From what I read, only one item contains a provision around Ellis Act evictions, and that is the one that's sponsored by the mayor and Supervisor Farrell. Planning Department, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I just wanted to make sure. That is a provision that I would like to see in there. I'm pretty sure all of us would like to see in there. And so if maybe someone can confirm on the record. Thank you.
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, I apologize. Could you please repeat your question? I was conferring with my colleagues.
No problem. So I just mentioned that one of the pieces that I think all of us care about, no matter which item you support, is about Ellis Act evictions. The only piece of legislation I saw with that provision was the one sponsored by the mayor and Supervisor Farrell. So I wanted to confirm that is true.
That's correct. The legislation sponsored by the mayor and Supervisor Farrell prohibits any unit that has been Ellis Acted since, I believe the date is October of this year, or maybe November.
November 1st, 2014.
Thank you, November 21st, 2014, and within 5 years after that from participating in the short-term rental registry program.
Thank you. Just wanted to correct that.
Thank you. Seeing no other names on the roster, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll on the motion to continue this item to the meeting of July 14, 2015?
Supervisor Marr?
No.
Marr, no. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos? Avalos, no. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
No.
Campos, no. Supervisor Christensen?
Aye.
Christensen, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, no. There are 7 ayes and 4 noes.
Items 37 and 38 are continued to the meeting of July 14th, 2014. Madam Clerk, can you please go to our 3 p.m. special order?
Items 43 and 44 comprise the special order at 3 p.m. for the Board of Supervisors to convene a committee of the whole pursuant to an approved motion on May 5th, 2015, for a public hearing on on the ordinance, which is the subject of item 44, to approve a minor amendment to the redevelopment plan for the Transbay redevelopment project area to provide bulk limits for general office buildings in Zone 1 and make the appropriate findings.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay. We'll wait till the room clears. Okay, the board is now sitting as a committee of the whole, and so we will now hear from the redevelopment agency on this item.
Is it OCI?
Oh,
okay.
I forget.
My apologies, Madam President. Okay.
OCII. Yes, I was a former redevelopment agency commissioner, and I forget that we have this new successor agency, so welcome.
Breed and members of the board, I am Marie Munson, Senior Development Specialist with the OCII. You have before you a proposed minor amendment to the redevelopment plan for the Transbay redevelopment project area. Given market and other conditions, OCII has determined that a general office development is the preferred scenario for the publicly owned land on Block 5 in Zone 1 of the project area. The minor amendment will facilitate the development of general office use, which is already permitted under the redevelopment plan. The redevelopment plan authorizes general office development on 2 sites within Zone 1, Block 5 and Block 10. However, the Zone 1 bulk controls set forth in the redevelopment plan are applicable to residential uses. They are not appropriate bulk controls for general office development. The minor plan amendment will clarify that the bulk controls for general office development in Zone 1 are those based on the C3O district, downtown office. Specifically, they will be consistent with controls permitted by the Planning Code, Sections 270, bulk limits, measurement, and 272, bulk limits, special exceptions in C3 districts. Zone 1 is shown in gray on the map. Block 5 and Block 10 are the crosshatched areas. The minor amendment will only affect Block 5. The amendment will not affect Block 10 because the western portion of Block 10 must be developed as open space, and the eastern portion of Block 10 is already developed. This slide is the Block 5 site. Parcel N1 in the lower left-hand corner will be the site of the office tower. The proposed development will include a 43-story office tower with nearly 767,000 gross square feet of office area and over 8,600 square feet of ground floor retail area. Streetscape improvements, including an extension of a portion of Natoma Street and approximately 18,500 square feet of public open space, of which nearly 15,200 will be located on parcels N1 and M1. The Block 5 office tower and retail development will provide many benefits. It will maximize developable square feet and create an efficient and leasable general office tower, which will generate significant tax increment. The development will also generate $172.5 million in sales proceeds for the development of the Transbay Transit Center, over $18 million in jobs housing linkage program revenue, and over $10 million in transit impact development fees. The project is subject to all OCII contracting policies, and to date, the project has achieved 50% SBE participation. The OCII Commission has adopted the environmental review findings pursuant to CEQA and approved the minor amendment. The Planning Department found that the minor amendment is in conformity with the general plan. OCII has submitted the minor amendment and accompanying documents to the Board of Supervisors and recommended the Board's approval of the amendment. We ask the Board of Supervisors to take the following actions: make the findings and CEQA certifications for the minor amendment, approve and adopt the redevelopment plan as amended by the minor amendment. If approved by the Board of Supervisors and the Mayor, the ordinance will become effective 90 days after its enactment. We have with us today representatives of OCII staff, the TJPA, and the development team.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I apologize that I missed making opening comments. I thought we were moving on to other items before this. But I did want to express my support for this minor amendment to the redevelopment plan for the Transbay redevelopment project area. As the board knows, we are sitting today as a committee of the whole as the zoning changes of this nature are needed to be approved by the board, which sits as the successor agency commission. The Transbay redevelopment project area allows office use but does not provide appropriate bulk limits for the office development. This was presented by OCII staff, Mary Munson. I just want to thank her for being here today and for their work in preparing this item before us.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. We will now open up the public hearing. If there are any members of the public who'd like to comment on this item, please come forward. You will have 2 minutes. See no public comment. Public comment is now closed. And this hearing has been held and is now filed. And are there any other members of the board who'd like to make any comments about this item? Seeing none, is there a motion to move this item forward, motioned by Supervisor Kim, seconded by Supervisor Cohen. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll on item number 44?
On item 44, Supervisor Marr. Marr not present. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Christensen.
Aye.
Christensen, aye. Supervisor Cohen. Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. There are 10 ayes.
This ordinance is passed unanimously on the first reading. Madam Clerk, can you please return to our regular agenda at item number 39?
Item 39 is an ordinance to amend the administrative code to require that all city elected officials keep public daily calendars of their meetings and events, and to require that calendars kept by elected officials and department heads include information about the identities of people attending meetings or events.
Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you. At the request of the President of the Board, I'd like to continue this item. I support this continuance till next week, to next Tuesday's board meeting.
What date is that, Andrew?
Madam President, that is June 6th, excuse me, that is, yes, June 16th.
Okay, Supervisor Avalos has made a motion to continue this item 1 week to the meeting of June 16, 2015, seconded by Supervisor Cohen. Without objection, this item is continued 1 week. Madam Clerk, can you please call item number 40?
Item 40 is an ordinance to amend the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code to simplify and consolidate campaign finance disclaimer and disclosure requirements. This item requires a 2/3 vote, which is 8 votes.
Okay. Colleagues, can we take this item? Same house, same call? Oh, actually, Madam Clerk, can you call the roll on this item, please?
On item 40, Supervisor Marr. Marr not present. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos. Aye. Campos, aye. Supervisor Christensen.
Aye.
Christensen, aye. Supervisor Cohen. Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. There are 10 ayes.
This ordinance passes unanimously on the first reading. Madam Clerk, can you call items 41 and 42 together?
Items 41 and 42 were referred without recommendation from the Rules Committee. Only one of these two motions shall be approved. Item 41 is a motion to reappoint Peter Cohen, term ending February 23, 2017, to the Citizens Committee on Community Development. Item 42, motion to appoint Clinton Loftman, term ending February 23, 2017, to the Citizens Committee on Community Development.
Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you very much. I wanted to make a motion to table item number 41 and to, table item number 41 and make a motion to support item 42.
Okay, Supervisor Cohen has made a motion to table item 41 and to support item number 42. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Wiener. Supervisor Avalos.
Yes, I am actually opposed to that motion, and I'm not sure what the process is. If there's a motion to table, that does that actually trump debate on whether I'm actually to the motion? I'm opposed to the motion of tabling, and I actually think that it should be the other way around. We have someone in Peter Cohen who has been a long-term member of the Citizens Committee on Community Development. His organization has been instrumental in San Francisco in promoting community development work in this city. And before Peter Cohen was on there, Renee Cazenave was also on this body. And years ago, I worked with Renee and many other other people who've been on the committee to make sure that we can have a real solid framework for community development work in San Francisco. And that work continues to this day with the membership that is on this body. This body has been politicized in a lot of ways over the years that I think has been really unnecessary. I actually think having the continuity of the current membership is going to be helpful, especially with a lot of the major decisions that we have going forward as a city about not just looking at community development block grants and McKinney-Bento funds, but looking also about how we match these funds with our affordable housing needs and community development needs in San Francisco. Peter has a wealth of experience working all across the city to work on that. I know that politically it might be challenging for some people, but he has been one that has been really committed to working communities here in the city. And I actually would a vote for Peter for me is not a vote against Clifton Loftman. He actually has a wealth of experience, and I would recommend him to apply again for this committee. He has a lot of his work he's done on the very issues that this body's involved in the East Bay, but we will be jeopardizing some long-term work that we have of a current member by putting someone even that is qualified like Clifton Loftman in this position, and I'd rather see that this Peter can continue. Peter also has a large amount of support from people all across San Francisco who have been supporting his efforts, and I would want to make sure that he continues his relationship with all these groups that are moving San Francisco forward in affordability for the city. So I would be voting against the motion to table his appointment.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be voting in favor of the motion. I think Clinton Loftman has a very, very broad experience around affordable housing and long experience around CDBG. And so I think it's a good motion, and it'll be a good appointment to the committee, and I'll be supporting it.
Thank you. Supervisor Campos.
Supervisor Cohen?
Supervisor Cohen has already spoken.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President. I forgot. Just want to say that I think that I'm disappointed that this is where we are. I understand that there's a different perspective, but I think that the issue here is it's someone. Peter Cohen is someone who has been serving on this body. I think that it's someone who has demonstrated a great deal of knowledge and commitment to the issues that the Citizens Committee on Community Development deals with. One of the things that has struck me over the last few days is how many people from different neighborhoods, from different parts of the city, have reached out to me in my office to emphasize the importance of reappointing Peter Cohen because of the expertise that he brings, and not just the knowledge and expertise, but also the fact that he represents a very important community that engages in development, and that perspective is badly needed in this kind of a body. I've had the opportunity to meet and work with Peter for a number of years now, and I'm just impressed by the amount of knowledge that he has, by his grasp of the issues, and I actually really think that it would be a big loss for the city if someone with that ability, knowledge, expertise did not continue, especially when the person is already serving in this capacity and has demonstrated a great deal of knowledge and has done a great deal of work. So I will be opposing the motion to table and hope that we reappoint Peter Cohen. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Marr.
I just wanted to add that I'm supportive of Peter Cohen as our maintaining his involvement and service on this committee. I wanted to say that he's developed not only a local San Francisco perspective, but also a regional perspective, as I and others on this board sit on regional bodies like the MTC and ABAG. Peter showed tremendous regional leadership with a recent regional prosperity committee that had money that came from HUD, the federal government, for lots of different community-based organizations, economic development agencies. And I think he was a tremendous leader on a regional level, not just looking at housing and development, but also jobs and transportation as well. I think not only acknowledging his important expertise on the local level, but also on the regional level is important. And I urge my colleagues to reappoint Peter Cohen. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I will just concur with some of the statements made and to support Peter Cohen today. This, again, is a reappointment for Peter Cohen on the Citizens Committee on Community Development, a committee that he's actually served on for a number of years. And if not reappointed, it will be the first time that we won't have an individual that is a lead policymaker, but also a representative for our many affordable housing organizations here in San Francisco on this committee. This committee is important in guiding the city around a number of decisions of how we spend down dollars around community development. Our community-based organizations that do affordable housing development have always had a voice and a set of eyes in the seat, and Peter has really not only played that role, but I know gives numerous hours to being on this committee. He is hardworking. He reads through everything. He attends his meetings, and he provides a lot of feedback and a lot of, I think, important perspective, not just to the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, but to members of the Board of Supervisors as well. A lot of people have an opinion about affordable housing and may even have some background on affordable housing. Peter actually works closely with all of our organizations that do this work, but has also brought many pieces of legislation before this board with the perspective that he has around the background development. I think it's important to have someone of this level of expertise that sits on this committee, and therefore I'll be supporting him today.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you. I guess what I want to say is that I've been pretty consistent about how I vote for people that would be that are reseeking their seat in the commission or some body. And what I've always done is to ask the question, have they been going to the meetings? Have they shown dedication to and commitment to what their chore is? And is anybody complaining about them? In which case, in this particular case, with Peter, I haven't heard any complaints. I know he goes to all the meetings. I know his expertise. The other piece of this is that outside of that particular committee, I've been really interested in family housing, and he is one person that I've been able to talk to in the field to discuss family housing. So I know he has some expertise around housing, for not only about affordable housing, but his expertise seems to expand beyond just affordable housing. And I would love to see him continue his work on the committee.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you very much, and thank you, colleagues, for your nice remarks about Peter Cohen. I'm in agreement with you. I think that he is a very smart and talented person who is dedicated to the housing conversation, so much so that I think that he will continue to be dedicated whether he's on this body or not. And I think it was Supervisor Avalos said that the body's been politicized, and I actually would agree with you, which is why I'm proposing that we support the alternative candidate, Clinton, largely because I'm looking to interrupt the politicalization of this body, and I do believe that Peter will continue to serve the community, and however, he is not the only game in town, and Mr. Loffman has demonstrated a deep knowledge of community as well as economic development. He's worked for nearly 3 decades working on inclusionary housing rehabilitation, first-time home buyer programs for organizations, municipalities, including Hayward, Walnut Creek, specifically focusing on community development. In his career, he's worked closely with many low-income communities and has a broad experience of HUD consolidated planning process. And for me, that's a real important sticking and salient point. That hasn't been my experience with Peter. And that is also a requirement within the seat, the description of the seat. Mr. Loffman's experience also includes an extensive work with federal, state, as well as local funds, which include CDBG, which is the Community Development Block Grants, as well as housing opportunities for persons with AIDS and emergency shelter grants, all of which the Citizens Committee on Community Development consider and provide recommendations for. Now, so I believe that his knowledge and familiarity with the funding mechanisms and past projects make him a strong, well-qualified person for this seat. And I respect and acknowledge Mr. Cohen's work on the CCCD and hope that, actually I don't even hope, I know that he will continue working in a professional manner, advocating and in other capacities on this body within the city. Excuse me, even whether he's on this body or whether he is not. So again, I'd like to just to reiterate that I'd like to a motion to hold the nomination for item number 2 and then move forward with item 42.
So Supervisor Cohen, the motion has been made to approve item 42 and table item 41. It's been seconded. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Supervisor Marr?
No.
Marr, no. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee?
No.
Yee, no. Supervisor Avalos? Avalos, no. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
No.
Campos, no. Supervisor Christensen?
No.
Christensen,
Sorry.
no.
Sorry.
Christensen, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim?
No.
Kim, no. There are 6 ayes and 5 noes.
Okay, the motion to approve item 42 and table item 41 passes. Madam Clerk, can we please go to item number 45?
Item 45 was considered by the Public Safety and Neighborhood Services Committee at a regular meeting on Thursday, June 4th, and was forwarded as a committee report. It's a resolution to determine that the transfer of a Type 21 on-sale general license from 736 Divisadero Street to 900 North Point Street for VOM Fast Oils, Vinegars, and Spirits will serve the public convenience, and recommending that the California Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control impose conditions on the issuance of this license.
Roll call vote.
On item 45, Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Christensen. Christensen, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim.
Aye.
Kim, aye. There are 11 ayes.
This resolution is adopted unanimously. Item 46, please.
Item 46 was considered by the Land Use and Transportation Committee at its regular meeting on Monday, June 8th, and was forwarded as a committee report. It's a resolution to declare the intention of the Board of Supervisors to establish a property-based business improvement district, the Greater Rincon Hill Community Benefit District, to levy a multi-year assessment on identified parcels within the proposed and approved boundaries map, approving the management district plan, the engineer's report, the notice, the proceedings, the assessment ballot, and the appropriate findings, and setting the time and place for the public hearing as July 28th, 3 p.m. here in the Legislative Chamber, room 250.
Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a moment to thank the Executive Committee of the Rincon Hill CBD for all of their work on putting this forward on its first step and reaching the threshold of 30% in order to begin this process. I know that was particularly challenging as ownership in this neighborhood was constantly changing and quickly evolving, and so just want to recognize the hard work of the individuals involved, and colleagues, I ask for your support.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, this resolution is adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you go to roll call for introductions?
Supervisor Marr, you're the first supervisor to introduce new business.
Thank you. Colleagues, I wanted to make a couple of brief announcements. I guess the first is I'm co-sponsoring with Supervisor Yee an ordinance regarding language equality and the language access ordinance, and I thank Supervisor Yee for his leadership for immigrant rights and language equality. The announcements are the 78th season of the Stern Grove Festival is coming up starting this coming Sunday. It's an incredible concert series. Thanks so much to Grants for the Arts for one of the most spectacular public free events at a beautiful place in our city, Stern Grove. For the listening audience who may not be familiar, the free summer concerts are every Sunday through the summer. Free, family-friendly, beautiful, a great way to enjoy the Stern Grove weather. Sometimes it's nice, other times you have to bundle up sometimes. And it's every Sunday until August 16th, starting at 2 p.m., but you got to get there early. And I know with various efforts, take public transit is critical. I'll be there this Sunday watching the Doobie Brothers from San Jose perform along with the California Honey Drops. And for the complete concert listing or schedule, go to sterngrove.org. Also, it's World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, June 12th, Friday from 1 to 4:30. The Department of Aging and Adult Services invites you and your staff to the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day at the main library. I think it's really important that the Department of Aging and Adult Services have tremendous programs to support seniors and people aging with Alzheimer's and dementia, but also hoarding and other issues as those issues have come up in our neighborhoods. This event includes a screening of the documentary Alive Inside and a discussion with the director Michael Rosato Bennett, and representatives from the Administration of Community Living Region 9 will be there, as well as others from our city departments and community groups. With this event and the film, the City and County of San Francisco is recognizing the issues of elder abuse across nations and the importance of ensuring safety and security of our elders and people with disabilities. It's a free event and open to everyone. The rest I'll submit. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr. Supervisor Weiner.
Submit.
Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. As Supervisor Mars mentioned, I'll be introducing legislation today called the Language Assistance and Services at the Board of Supervisors meetings. Colleagues, today I am introducing this ordinance, and our city prides itself in being immensely diverse. We have residents from every corner of the world. Approximately 36% of the city's residents are immigrants, and nearly 21% of the total city population identifies as limited English speakers. San Francisco has one of the strongest language access policies in the nation, and we are always looking for ways to improve in order to ensure that every resident is able to engage in the political process to the fullest extent. Currently, our administrative code states that language assistance be provided at all meetings on the Board of Supervisors and committees as needed. The clerk's office goes above and beyond to accommodate requests. However, it is often difficult to provide language services on demand. We have come across this a few instances just in the past few months in which a constituent requires language interpretation during our board meeting, and we have to find someone to fill in because a certified language interpreter was not present. By creating a pilot project at every Board of Supervisors meeting starting in September 2015, the staff of the Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs will be present to offer language services in Spanish, Tagalog, and Chinese. The staff will also provide translation of the legislation introduced and simplified board agendas to the extent feasible. The pilot will last until July 2016. When I was on the Board of Education, we had interpreters on hand at every single meeting in case parents with limited English attended and needed assistance. This made a world of difference because we began to interact with our constituents on a different level. Not only were they able to express their thoughts during the public comment, they were also able to listen to our discourse and understand what decisions were being made. I want to recognize that this is not an easy job, but it is one that is crucial for us to continue serving diverse residents of San Francisco. It is my hope that with this pilot, we will be able to engage limited English residents citywide. I want to acknowledge and thank the Director of the Office of Civic Engagement and Immigrant Affairs, Adrienne Pond, and her staff for working with us on this proposed pilot. I would also like to thank the diligent staff at the clerk of the Board of Supervisors who often go above and beyond to serve our public, especially limited English speakers. They have been assisting limited English speakers since the administrative section was originally enacted in 1984. I also wanted to thank Supervisor Avalos, Campos, and Marr for their co-sponsorship. I guess on a personal note, as I mentioned before, being on the board for Board of Education for 8 years, and just having access of this translation available, and people actually knew about it, really opened up the engagement for people that were non-English speakers. They didn't have to hope that somebody would be here or hope to find somebody that can come with them. They knew that somebody would be there to help them. So, colleagues, I hope you will support this ordinance. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Call just a couple items for introduction today. One is a resolution supporting Senate Bill 128, which proposes to establish an End-of-Life Option Act, or the End-of-Life Option Act in California. This is a long-term effort and started many, many years ago, but has recently been given momentum with the story of Brittany Maynard, a 29-year-old Californian with terminal brain cancer, who moved to Oregon to access their death with dignity law. She passed peacefully last November with her family by her side. SB 128 was introduced in January of this year by State Senators Lois Wolk and Bill Monning. Modeled after the 1997 Oregon law, it gives terminally ill, mentally competent California adults the right to physician-prescribed, self-administered medication to hasten death. It gives patients in consultation with their physicians the right to a peaceful death with dignity if their suffering becomes unbearable. SB 128 includes measures to protect vulnerable patients from coercion and safeguards physicians, pharmacists, and healthcare providers from civil or criminal liability, in addition to providing opt-out options for healthcare providers. Physicians are also required to discuss alternatives or additional treatment opportunities, and the patient can decide whether to use prescription or rescind at any time. This medical practice is already recognized in other states such as Oregon, Washington, Vermont, and Montana. Data collected in Oregon and Washington shows that the end-of-life option is only sparingly used, with fewer than 1 in 500 deaths, which a sizable percentage of individuals who obtained the prescription never ingested the medication in the very end. Recent polls show 2/3 of Californians support this option. And last week, the Senate passed the legislation on a 23-15 vote. Now it goes on to the Assembly, where we hope the bill can find support as well. So, colleagues, I urge your support for this measure as it winds its way to next committee's or to next week's board meeting. I also have another piece of legislation which I believe is very timely, especially considering our city budget. This is an ordinance that would provide some transparency in the use of surveillance technology. Last November, I requested the city attorney to draft legislation to create a surveillance accountability ordinance. With the rapid expansion of surveillance technologies, the city needs to be proactive in making sure there is public oversight of how these technologies are used. While some of these technologies provide public benefit, we need to create a public process for reviewing them and approving them, as well as implementing policies about how they're regulated. There are a number of questions that we need to ask before we allow city departments to use new surveillance technologies. How will they be used? How will civil liberties be protected? What will the cost be? Back in November, the ACLU published a model ordinance, which we shared with the city attorney in our city departments. Since then, we've worked with the city attorney to integrate the surveillance oversight process into the city's budget process. This ordinance would require the Board of Supervisors to approve a surveillance data policy before any department seeks funding or grants for surveillance technologies. This ordinance would also require departments to submit annual reports on the uses of surveillance technologies and for the controller to annually audit these technologies as well. And this is timely because I know we have a very big budget ask coming before committee about the use of body-mounted cameras for the police department. And these cameras, body-mounted cameras, would be subject to this proposed ordinance. So I look forward to our discussion at the Board of Supervisors about how to move this forward. And I'm hoping that we can gain a request for waiving the 30-day rule so we can actually have this ordinance discussed as part of the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And I'd like to begin by, first of all, thanking all of my colleagues who sat through a very long meeting last week as a committee of the whole. I want to thank President Breed and her staff for working with my office to help to make that happen, and I just want to thank my colleagues. I know that it was a very long meeting, but it was also a very moving meeting, and I really appreciate the fact that each and every one of you sat through that and listened to this community. It is greatly appreciated as a representative for the mission. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the clerk of the board and her staff, and specifically Peggy Nevin, who worked very hard to make translation available to all the folks that came out. I thought the translation was excellent, and I know that your staff worked very hard to make that happen. So it is greatly appreciated, Madam Clerk, to you and your staff, and Peggy in particular, who made that happen. And along those lines, thank you to Supervisor Yee for introducing his item today on that very important issue. It is my pleasure today that after years of working on this, that I have the opportunity to introduce a ballot initiative establishing the first of its kind Legacy Business Historic Preservation Fund. I want to thank my colleagues who are co-sponsors of this measure, Supervisors Avalos, Kim, and Mar. Your support is greatly appreciated. For generations, thriving neighborhood businesses and nonprofits have played an essential role in defining our communities. These institutions have essentially defined these neighborhoods. Current economic pressures, including skyrocketing rents for retail space, are causing San Francisco small businesses and nonprofits to suffer, and many long-established entities have been forced to close their doors. These are businesses that have become cultural institutions that have helped create the character of San Francisco's neighborhoods. To address San Francisco's affordability crisis, I have brought forward many proposals on the issue of housing. Today, I am proud to bring forward a proposal to address the loss of our neighborhood businesses and nonprofits. I have been working with small businesses and historic preservation advocates to design a program that would ensure the economic viability of local businesses. The first part of this initiative was passed unanimously by the Board of Supervisors this past March when we established a legacy business registry for local businesses, including restaurants, bars, retail establishments, art spaces, performance venues, and manufacturers. These are businesses that have served San Franciscans for more than 30 years. To be included in that registry, and I want to thank Supervisor Farrell and his staff for working with us on that important measure. These businesses must demonstrate a strong connection to the neighborhood and community in which they operate. The registry program should launch shortly, and we're very excited and grateful to all who have made that happen. Today, I'm introducing the second part of this initiative that asks the voters of San Francisco to create the Legacy Business Historic Preservation Fund. This fund will make legacy businesses on the registry eligible for an annual grant of $500 per employee, as well as offers an annual $4.50 per square foot grant to property owners who extend 10-year leases to legacy business tenants. Preservation experts project that there are more than 3,000 small businesses that are eligible for legacy business status here in San Francisco. Annual grants will be capped at $50,000 per legacy business and $22,500 for building owners. Annual costs for the fund are projected to be at about $3 million for the first year, with an estimated annual new appropriation to the Legacy Business Fund of a possible $3 million per additional year. A report by the city's budget and legislative analysts showed that the closure of small businesses in San Francisco has reached record numbers, with almost 4,000 small businesses closing in the year 2014 alone. In contrast, only 693 small businesses closed in 1994, and in the first year of the study. This report draws connections to San Francisco's skyrocketing rents and the high level of commercial evictions. State law, as we know, disallows controls on commercial leases, and commercial rents in most neighborhoods have risen significantly, with some areas increasing more than 256%. This measure is designed to provide stability to our businesses during this uncertain time. What would San Francisco be without so many of our legacy businesses? Café du Nord, Café La Bohème, Casa Sanchez, Mission Neighborhood Center, Cliff House, Bernal Heights Neighborhood Center, Telegraph Hill Neighborhood Center, Cameron House, Dog Patch Saloon, La Victoria Bakery, Café Trieste, Lefty O'Doul's, Mitchell's Ice Cream, Potrero Hill Neighborhood House, The Ramp, Vesuvio Cafe, Wildside West, Booker T. Washington Community Service Center, Chinatown CDC, and so many others that have truly defined the character of these neighborhoods. Again, I want to thank my co-sponsors, Supervisors Avalos, Kim, and Mar. I also want to take this opportunity to thank my incredible staff who have been working on this. Previously on my staff, Nathan Albee and Hillary Ronan, my chief of staff. I'm very proud of this measure, and I look forward to taking this item to the voters of San Francisco in November. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Christensen.
My district has an especially volatile combination of aging housing stock and the pressures of speculation and tourism. It's awful to lose one's home, especially after years or even decades of residence. It is even worse than to have to move away to find an affordable replacement home, to leave familiar blocks, friends, schools, and services. I want to make sure that residents who have suffered displacement and our neighbors in need of secure affordable housing have preferential access to nearby affordable housing. So I'm pleased to join Supervisors Cohen and Wiener and President Breed to introduce legislation today that will help displaced tenants stay in their neighborhoods by including a neighborhood preferences provision for tenants eligible for neighborhood affordable housing. The Neighborhood Preference Program expands existing preferences to include those impacted by all no-fault evictions, by dwelling unit removals or demolitions, and by expiring rent restrictions. This program will help provide options for neighbors who might otherwise be forced from their neighborhoods and even from the city itself. Our primary goal every day is to prevent displacement and to discourage the factors that lead to it. This program will give us one more option when people are displaced. And the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Christensen. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you very much. I'm really proud to join Supervisor Christensen and join this and join her in the introduction of the neighborhood preference for housing legislation. And Supervisor Campos, I think you're going to be pleased with this legislation. It's pretty bold, and it helps. In drafting this, I had in mind our constituencies that we both care very deeply about. It will go a long way to create a pathway for San Franciscans who grew up in San Francisco and have been here for a very long time, not only to stay in San Francisco and stay in the neighborhood, but also by doing so, by carving out a certain percentage of affordable housing units for residents in each respective supervisorial district. I think that's really critical. So please take a look at this and let us know your feedback on it, because the neighborhood preference plays a significant role in addressing the fears of low-income and moderate-income families that new housing developments will cause them to be priced out of the communities that they grew up in. This is something that I hear. I know Supervisor Breed hears it in her district as well, and I'm beginning to hear it in the LGBT community, particularly seniors that are concerned and would like to age in place, and I think this is why Supervisor Wiener is in supportive of this legislation. Longtime residents who apply for affordable housing units through our lottery system essentially get lost amongst the thousands of people that apply from both within and outside of our city limits, which forces them to compete for a small number of affordable units. Now, this legislation will give people that are from the community and help to build the community a better chance at staying in their homes. So, colleagues, as Supervisor Christensen indicated, this legislation not only provides a neighborhood preference for our affordable housing units, it also is an expansion of the Ellis Act housing preference by providing additional protections for displaced tenants through the Ellis Act. So I join Supervisor Christensen in asking for your support on this important legislation, and I hope to draw a dialogue across many parts of the city. This is groundbreaking. Thank you. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Breed.
Thank you. Colleagues, I'm really proud to be introducing this legislation with my colleagues, Supervisor Christensen and Cohen, today. Since I've been in office, it's something I've been working on. When I served on the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency Commission, one of the most frustrating experiences was watching a lot of the affordable housing get built and members of my community asking why can't they have access. And even when we tried to find those individuals who had certificate of preference certificates, it was just really challenging, and in some instances they may not have qualified and they weren't able to pass their certificates down from generation to generation. We pushed and passed legislation that gave the right for those certificates to be passed down. We even hired staff to go out and find families who were displaced by redevelopment in order to explain to them what their rights are and their ability to pass those certificates down. Many of those families moved out of San Francisco and have settled in other places because redevelopment 40 years later took that long to even redevelop the Western Addition community, but more importantly, they didn't make it easy for members of that community to have access to a lot of the housing that was built, and especially a lot of the newer affordable housing developments. This is why a neighborhood preference is really important. And prioritizing our very limited affordable housing stock for those who are a part of a community is key. I remember when I finished college and I came home and was wondering, where will I live? What can I afford? Again, I saw a lot of housing built around me, but it was very difficult to access it, although I qualified for that housing. And with this particular legislation, I'm excited that not only does it continue to maintain that certificate of preference priority, it also includes in its priorities Ellis Act evictions, no-fault evictions, affordable development where affordable provisions are expiring, BMRs that are transitioning to ownership, and residential merger or demolition. Of course, there is an application process, and these individuals will have to meet those particular qualifications. But the challenge of being a part of a large lottery system where there's hundreds of names, and I don't know if any of you have been to any one of those pulling of names in a lottery system, it's agonizing. People are very emotional, hoping in these thousands of names that hopefully their name would get pulled, and for maybe even 12 units. And so that's why this preference is key. I've saw too many friends and family members displaced by the redevelopment agency, and also the frustration of being a part of a community and not feeling as if you have access to many of the things that are around you that you qualify for. Too many San Franciscans are losing their homes at no-fault evictions or other financial pressures, and watching new residential developments go up in their neighborhoods and having a slim chance of receiving any affordable housing units or being able to afford the units that are going up. Changing these practices within our affordable housing policies can help our neighborhoods stay more vibrant, more culturally relevant, and hopefully allow for San Franciscans to have access to San Francisco. My colleagues and I are working to right the past and current displacements and current displacement wrongs, keeping our residents in their homes, in homes they can afford, and in their beloved neighborhoods will make San Francisco a better place for all of us. I also want to thank Olson Lee for continuing, the Mayor's Office of Housing Director, for his continued work in helping us to try and figure out ways to work with the federal government and their policies and work locally in order to provide the neighborhood preference, as well as Kathy Davis, who has really been a champion on affordable housing issues and leading the way for this neighborhood preference. I'm really excited about it, and I'm glad it's finally moving forward through this Board of Supervisors. Two other things, colleagues. This weekend, we are fortunate to have two of, I believe, the best festivals happening in my district in San Francisco. This Saturday will be the 65th annual San Francisco Juneteenth Festival. It will be on Fillmore Street between Sutter and Turk. It's a great festival with performances, with vendors, with a parade. It is a very, it's like a community reunion where a lot of San Franciscans, sadly, who have been displaced or moved out of the city, come back. So it's like a big family reunion, and I hope members of the public, both new community members and old community members, would join us this Saturday along Fillmore Street to celebrate the Juneteenth Festival. The other festival, which is really popular in my district, is the Haight Street Festival, which will be this Sunday, next Sunday, June 14th. I'm sorry, I think I said this weekend. My apologies. From 11 to 5:30. It's another wonderful street fair that we have in our district. And so I just wanted to highlight those two particular events. It's the 38th annual Haight-Ashbury Street Fair. We have an amazing history in our community, and I hope some of you will take time out of your schedules to come to our neighborhoods and celebrate with us. Thank you, and the rest I submit.
Thank you, President Breed. Supervisor Farrell.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I have one item today, colleagues. So last November, our city services auditor completed one of the most comprehensive reports regarding HSA and their supportive housing portfolio that serves the homeless here in San Francisco. The city services auditor partner with HSA to identify the types of services clients in supportive housing utilize, the degree of utilization, how clients' needs may change over time when housed, and whether the services are supporting client transitions to other forms of stable housing. The report also noted that they had a difficult time collecting the data needed to assess the percentage of supportive housing clients on public benefits because some of the data simply didn't exist or even wasn't tracked. From the data they were able to get their hands on, which was minimal, they noted that over 250 adults or more could qualify for in-home supportive services but didn't currently receive the benefit, and that more parents in HSA's family buildings could apply for CalWORKs on behalf of their child or children. Public benefits simply help people secure their most basic needs in our society. They provide a source of income, whether it's CAP or SSI, support services that help people get connected and to find employment, help them secure food through CalFresh, help people get access and pay for health care, or in-home supportive services, as we talk about frequently as IHSS. Public benefits also help the city's resources stretch further in San Francisco and become more efficient because of the support from federal and state governments. So today I'm introducing straightforward legislation that will help maximize enrollment in public benefits for clients in HSA's supportive housing portfolio to help them get on a path towards self-sufficiency. The ordinance itself provides new requirements for housing providers in HSA that are all geared towards maximizing the enrollment of public benefits amongst their supportive housing clients. First, the ordinance requires that housing providers report back to the city within the first 6 months after a new supportive housing tenant has been placed in a housing unit on what benefits the client has applied for and what they are eligible for. Secondly, it requires an annual report on public benefit utilization among the supportive housing tenants from the housing providers for every housing property in HSA's portfolio. It will also require more thorough outreach and case management from the providers by having them document the times and methods they reach out to their clients to encourage them to enroll in the maximum public benefits they are eligible for. In the annual report, the providers must provide information regarding the following: the percentage of clients enrolled in all of the public benefits for which they are entitled, the percentage of clients who have applied for all of the public benefits for which they are eligible, a full summary of the reasonable efforts made to help the client enroll in all the public benefits for which the client qualifies, and if the clients are not enrolled in the maximum public benefits for which they are eligible, an explanation as to why a higher percentage of clients are not enrolled, and a description and plan of how the provider will enroll more of its clients in the public benefits for which they qualify moving forward. For HSA, the ordinance mandates that the agency create a worksheet to share with the housing providers that lists the criteria for eligibility for each public benefit. They must also share the worksheet publicly on their website for people to access, and the agency must regularly update the worksheet as any changes are made to laws governing public benefits. Additionally, HSA will be required to conduct 2 or more audits of housing providers on an annual basis to determine compliance with the ordinance. Just like the eviction reporting and transparency legislation that I authored last year that we as a board approved unanimously, this law will first help the city collect more accurate and appropriate data to better understand which clients in supportive housing are utilizing public benefits and to what extent. Public benefits help secure the most vulnerable in our communities and get them on a path towards self-sufficiency. Again, they provide our most basic needs. This legislation will specifically help more seniors and families get the benefits they need and deserve by creating a process and requirements for how they will be addressed by service providers to ensure that they are not losing out on benefits for which they qualify for. And most importantly, the legislation will ensure that moving forward, our city of San Francisco has a dedicated effort and process to maximize all public benefits for those working to exit homelessness. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell and Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I just wanted to announce, actually, and invite folks this Saturday to the second of our series of movie night at Victoria Menolodres Park. We will actually be watching Jurassic Park, and we encourage you to come out with your families and bring blankets, and hopefully the weather will keep up. If not, bring your sleeping bags. And that will begin this Saturday, 6 o'clock. Victoria Menolodres Park is on Folsom Street between 6 and 7, and this was part of our office effort to help activate our parks here in District 6. And the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Seeing no other names on the roster, Madam President, that concludes the roll call for the introduction of new business.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Can you please read public comment?
At this time, the public may comment generally for up to 2 minutes on items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board, to include the policy discussion between the mayor and the board, the minutes, and the items on the adoption without reference to committee calendar, items 49 through 51. Please note that public comment is not allowed on items that have already been subject to public comment at a board committee. Pursuant to the board's rules, direct your remarks to the board as a whole and not to individual supervisors and nor to the audience. Speakers using translation assistance will be allowed twice the amount of time to testify. And if you would like your document to be displayed on the overhead projector, please clearly state such to SFG TV and remove the document when the screen should return to live coverage of the meeting.
Thank you. First speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. I'm Peter Warfield, Executive Director of Library Users Association. I want to bring up the fact that the San Francisco Public Library is betraying the public in a variety of ways, and the 2 ways I'd like to talk about is damaging access by the public and surveillance of patrons. We ask the Board of Supervisors to hold hearings and to closely question the library's budget, with respect to these sorts of issues and remind you that the library's budget currently is by far the highest of libraries in its category of service and triple the average of libraries in North America, serving 500,000 to 1 million people according to Public Library Data Service records. When the library's new Teen Center opens next week on June 18th, you and the public need to know that this was done by destruction of more than half of the library's easy access to magazines. The Literacy and Learning Center, which was supposedly part of that project, completely decimated the entire west side of the library magazines, and this is what it looked like the day before they tore out the shelving. All those magazines on the West Wing facing City Hall taken away and put in Brooks Hall, where you have to wait a day to get them. This is the cost of the Learning and Literacy Center and its related Teen Center. There's also BiblioCommons, which unfortunately I've talked about before and which the library has installed as its new catalog. That has serious issues of patron surveillance, dossier creation, censorship, and...
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, President Breed and other victims/members of the cabal. My name is Christopher Dahl, and I live at 6th and Howard, less than 14 meters and 10 blocks from sea level. I rise to comment on my landlord and expand on my theme of managerial class negligence. The organization that runs, so to speak, the building where I live is called the Tenderloin Housing Clinic, or THC. They run lots of SRO buildings and have a big budget. They have lots of executive staff, including 3 levels of executives above the property manager, who is actually on site. All these executives do is spend time going to meetings, spend time preparing for meetings, and then spend time writing up meetings and discussing the need for more meetings to discuss the need for more meetings. And nothing gets done. This so-called organization is run by someone named Randy Shaw. He gets interviewed on national television and radio as a concerned and compassionate advocate for the health and safety of the poor. Ha! What a motherless joke. He wrote a book, he wants royalties, and he mouths off on TV. Big deal. Except this so-called organizer owes me sleep. Hours and hours of sleep. He denies me hours and hours of the quiet enjoyment of my premises. This Randy Shaw is the chief dim bulb of the Half-Wit Club. Randy Shaw is the chief shirker of the Half Measures Club. Randy Shaw is the chief liar of the Half-Truth Club. Randy Shaw is the chief thief of the Half-Time Club. Half-time work, double-time pay, woohoo! I get a lot crankier than usual when my sleep is stolen. Thank you, President Breed.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
United States is the most fascist, corrupted country in the world. It's evicted 85 years old person, Holocaust survivor and World War II survivor, to die on the street, because this is only the way when they evict. In here is sitting 11 supervisors from this community. You're so much barbarian like government of the United States, okay? And it's sitting here, Jewish supervisor, black supervisor, Chinese supervisor. How could you allow that 85 years person like your grandfather, your father, will die on the street and nothing you do? I pray on Torah, Bible, that you should to be punished what you do when you evict 85 years old a person on the street.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, honorable members of the Board of Supervisors. My name is Reuben David Goodman. I'm a mental health consumer. I'd like to report to you an example of the conditions in state licensed board and cares within the city and county of San Francisco. I'm a resident of Golden Residential Care Home, which is located at 166 Foote Avenue. The minimum requirement for a board and care facility operator is to provide a bed in a shared room and 3 meals per day. On Friday evening, I informed the caretaker that I was going to a meeting, I would return by 8 p.m., please save me dinner. I returned at 8 p.m., and I waited because usually I'll return, this person is non-communicative but puts the dinner on the table. When she did not put the dinner on the table, I said, Linda, what about dinner? And she shrugged and said, no. I then proceeded to the telephone, which is located in the hallway where everyone can hear your conversation, and called the number of the Ombudsman office and left a message for Isaac Taggart, who is the Ombudsman, that I was not, that I returned to the facility and was not provided with the dinner. Well, right after that, Linda, the caretaker, got up, went to the kitchen, unlocked a cabinet, and there was the dinner. What kind of human being denies a mental health consumer their dinner when in fact the dinner is there and would have left it in the cabinet for the food to spoil? This is just one example of the kind of conditions. These are state licensed, but I believe the San Francisco Board of Supervisors should take some responsibility to ensure the safety and care of these residents. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Nancy Jacobson. I live at 3939 Noriega Street, number 4 in San Francisco. I want to thank the President and Board of Supervisors, especially Supervisors Avalos and Marr, for co-sponsoring the resolution in support of SB 128, the End of Life Option Bill. I also want to thank Frances Shea, Supervisor Avalos' aide, for her help in bringing this important resolution before you. So, as you know, the State Senate passed this bill last week, and in the process there was an extensive debate, which I don't know if you've had the chance to view the video, but there were many people who spoke passionately both for and against the bill. There are 30 million people in California, and there are at least that many stories to tell about people who have suffered endlessly in the death process, and their family, friends and family who have watched them. I am just one of those 30 million people. I have survived cancer 3 times, and I have no doubt that it will get me in the end. I was born here in San Francisco. I want to die here in San Francisco. I do not want to move to Oregon. And I beg you, please, to support this resolution and tell the rest of California that we are a compassionate, progressive city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Supervisors. I'm Robert Leiner. I'm speaking as an individual and as a physician, as a patient, and as a patient plaintiff in a lawsuit seeking the same ends that are being sought by Senate Bill 128. It's interesting to note that the last word before the vote was taken in the Senate was spoken by Senator Walk, who was one of the authors of the Senate bill, quoting the California Medical Association to the effect that even the best palliative care sometimes is insufficient to prevent the ultimate suffering that might be unbearable from some patients. It's a sea change to have seen that quotation, because the California Medical Association used to oppose aid in dying. Excuse me. On the other hand, the San Francisco Medical Society has been trying to change the position of the CMA for at least the last 15 years or so. San Francisco tends to lead the way. We've done that with other civil rights issues like marriage equality, and here you have a chance to show that San Francisco can lead the way by helping the passage of Senate Bill 128. No one is going to be dying. There won't be there won't be more people dying as a result of aid in dying being legalized than are already dying. There'll just be less suffering. Already, there's nothing new about physician aid in dying. It's just been, to some extent, something done with secrecy. And one of the great things in Oregon over the last 18 years is that the aid in dying has been open. The conversations have been improved about this end-of-life issues. Physicians have gotten more training. Pain management's been better. Patients are dying at home better. 85% or more of patients who participate in aid in dying in Oregon do so while they're in hospice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker.
My name is Doreen Cotter. I'm a native San Franciscan, and I thank you for the opportunity of sharing my story with regards to the End-of-Life Assembly Bill 128. My adult son recently died of a brain tumor. Towards the end of his life, he was no longer able to speak or walk, but was still surprisingly physically fit enough that it could have taken several weeks before his life would end. Consequently, once in hospice, he chose to refuse food and water in order to hasten his death. It was difficult for him and for his family. It's for this reason that I support this End-of-Life Option Act and hope that you will also support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Jean Amos. I'm a San Francisco resident, and I want to thank Supervisor Avalos for introducing this resolution. There are 5 other states that have had it. The entire country of Canada just passed this end-of-life option bill for just as a universal law of the country. Former Supervisor Mark Leno gave a really beautiful speech. Oh, thank you. A lovely speech talking about the years in the 80s when HIV, his friends from HIV were dying and they had no options, and it was pretty miserable. And that was one of the reasons that he really wanted to support this, was to give peace to people who are facing a terminal and very unpleasant ending. So your support would be really wonderful to show that San Francisco is behind this legislation that is so supported already by the citizens of California, and also most medical doctors have been shown. So I would appreciate it if you do pass this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. As you know, I read a lot of Hank Williams material as it relates to today's problems. In case you wanted to know, Hank Williams sang a lot about suffering and pain because he believed that if you spread the awareness of human suffering out thin enough, somehow it helps. He himself was born with an incurable, very painful spinal defect called spinal bifida. Yeah. He died at the age of 29, mostly from taking what he felt was helpful in relieving that pain. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Tom Gilberti, thank you. Closing out transportation. Corporate private buses stopping at Muni. need to be all accessible. They need to pick up Muni riders also. Pay reasonable fees for city streets, and please pull up for the Muni drivers so they can park behind them and not delay traffic. Taxis. 26 years ago, we had no wheelchair accessible taxis. Uber doesn't now. We're going backwards under this administration. Bad policy. Elevator month. Please, everybody hearing this, in the chambers, at home, use an elevator at the Muni stops underground for Montgomery Powell Civic Center. Time yourself when you get out of an underground train. See how long it takes to get back to the surface, or when you're about ready to go down in the elevator, down the stairs, time yourself to go around and use the elevators and see how long. What's the difference? 4. This is I mentioned this before. All transportation workers, Muni, BART, San Mateo, everybody in the network, all the workers, they're losing the right to strike, but they should have the right for a holiday. They report to work, they open up the gates, they close through the boxes, and the people ride free. And I believe that's going to be one way to help mitigate problems with workers and the corporate structure of things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to provide public comment at this time? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Madam Clerk, can you read the adoption without reference to committee items, please?
Items 49 through 51 are being considered for immediate adoption without committee reference. A single roll call vote may enact these items. If a member objects, an item may be severed and considered separately.
Okay, Supervisor Weiner?
Item 50.
Okay. On the remaining items, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Weiner.
Aye.
Weiner, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Christensen.
Aye.
Christensen, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim.
Aye.
Kim, aye. There are 11 ayes.
Those items are adopted unanimously. Madam Clerk, can you read item number
50.
50, please?
Item 50 is a resolution to oppose California State Assembly Bill 57, authored by Assemblymember Quirk, which would significantly limit San Francisco's ability to regulate wireless telecommunication facilities.
Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you, Madam President. And first, I also want to thank Supervisors Christensen, Tang, and Farrell for co-sponsoring this resolution. AB 57 is a bill that would significantly undermine San Francisco's local control and local control across California over siting decisions for wireless telecommunications facilities. In San Francisco, we embrace the idea that we need to improve and allow our telecommunications firms to improve access, internet access, wireless access for our residents, and that requires infrastructure work. But we also know that we need to make sure that this equipment, when locations are being determined, that we do so in a thoughtful way, consistent with the needs of our neighborhoods, consistent with our various policies here in San Francisco. And we work through that, and I think we do a pretty good job. Unfortunately, AB 57 would dramatically undermine our ability to exercise that local decision-making process. It would require that these decisions be made within a very, very short period of time, which would either result in automatic approval of a lot of inappropriate sites, or would require our planning department to start mass rejecting these applications, which would result in a very chaotic situation and a lot of litigation. It's just not the right approach. The good thing is that a growing coalition of cities in California has been forming to oppose or seek significant amendments to AB 57, and I believe just today Los Angeles voted to go on record opposing AB 57, so we are definitely in good company. I do want to make a minor amendment to one of the resolve clauses, page 3, line 8, and that is to recognize that there are discussions going on about amendments to AB 57 to hopefully make it much more palatable to cities and towns in California. And so I would like to add at the end of that resolve clause, the resolve clause currently states, resolved that the city respectfully urges the California legislature to not approve or the governor of California to veto AB 57, to insert comma, unless amended to maintain meaningful local control over the review of WTS facilities. So I move that amendment.
Supervisor Wiener has made a motion to amend, seconded by Supervisor Tang. Can we take that without objection? The amendment passes without objection. Supervisor Wiener?
And colleagues, I ask your support.
Okay, Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. I do want to thank Supervisor Wiener, but also Omar Masri from the Planning Department. He's been helping us here in San Francisco really track this issue. And I wanted to join in on this resolution opposing AB 57 because we already do have limited ability to have a say when it comes to some of these antennas in our city. And so when we're hearing from neighbors and complaints about whether they're on these wooden poles or just getting larger and larger in size, we do believe that there are ways that we can make the design a lot better, that we can find whether it's rooftop facilities or other ways to not only allow for the service but also work within the means of the neighbors so that it is acceptable to them as well. And so I am very supportive of this, and again just want to thank our planning department for tracking this statewide.
Thank you, Supervisor Tang. Colleagues, can we take item number 50 as amended, same house, same call? Without objection, this resolution is adopted as amended unanimously. Madam Clerk, can we go to the next item?
Madam President, there are no in memoriams.
Okay.
Today.
Colleagues, that brings us to the end of the agenda today. Madam Clerk, is there any further business before us?
That concludes our business for today.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.